United States. But perhaps the real eye of the storm, which is perhaps more worrying, banks in Japan down double digits. MUFG, one of the biggest banks, is down 15%, suggesting there could be contagion into other parts of these economies. And look, there you've got Australia, also down 4%, similar to the UK, only got the 10% tariff, but still suffering significantly. Shanghai down 6%. Well, our Asia correspondent, Helen Smith, is standing by for us in Beijing. Helen, very good morning to you. Turbulent start to markets, continuing the theme of last week. Perhaps actually even worse, the snapshot this morning. Talk us through what has happened over the course of the weekend. And I guess I mentioned Australia there, not retaliating, but front and centre, China is.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think there's a real sense this morning that the markets are not just responding to what Donald Trump announced on Wednesday afternoon US time, but they are also now responding to, crucially, how China decided to retaliate. China actually announced what it would do in retaliation sort of late on Friday afternoon, Asia time. So a lot of the markets were just about to close. They didn't have a chance to properly kind of absorb that news. Actually, markets in China, Taiwan and Hong Kong were actually closed altogether on Friday because it was a national holiday. So you're getting this sense now here in Asia on Monday morning that they're all having a chance to absorb that news. And as you were just running through there, the falls are absolutely astonishing. 10% off the Hong Kong Hang Seng index. Taiwan's index also down 10%. The Nikkei, 8% or so when it first opened. It's rallied a little since then, but really, really big numbers, akin to sort of similar to what we saw around the time of the COVID pandemic at the very beginning days of that. And it's no surprise, really, when you take into account the very big numbers that are involved in this sort of tit-for-tat trade war for, now that we're seeing between China and the US. Remember, Donald Trump announced on Wednesday that he would introduce a 34% reciprocal tariff on all Chinese goods. That is on top of what he announced earlier in his term. China decided to respond in kind, 34% in exact tit-for-tat retaliation on top of what it had earlier announced. So in reality, we're talking about in excess of 50% tariffs on all goods between China and the US. And these are the two world's biggest economies. So all these other countries in this region and in the world are deeply affected by what those two countries do to each other. It affects trade flows, it affects incomes, it affects global demand. And I think also crucially, the markets will be uneasy because there is just a sense of retaliation and no sense that negotiation is anywhere near at the moment. I think they get that from not just how big China's response was. Previously, there's been a sense of restraint, not so at all at the back end of last week. And certainly what Donald Trump said over the weekend about everyone needing to take their medicine. He also said there'd be no deal with China until the trade deficit was sorted out. So I think a real nervousness that no one's backing down in terms of the two biggest superpowers here. And that has an impact on everyone.
Certainly does, Helen. Thanks so much for that. And a reminder of those sharp declines we're seeing in Asian markets, 7% for Japan, 10% for Hong Kong. Europe's markets open at 8 a.m. We'll, of course, cover that for you live when it happens. And US futures, of course, don't open until 2:30 p.m. Fully. But US futures are pointing to similar vibe of selling once again. We've got the S&P 500 down 3.5%, the futures market there, and the Nasdaq, tech-heavy Nasdaq, pointing to a 4.5% decline at the open as things stand. Well, the Prime Minister says he'll relax rules around electric vehicles after car makers were hit by Donald Trump's tariffs. Let's have a look at the plan. By the end of 2030, the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles will end. That was introduced by the last government. The sale of plug-in hybrids will continue until 2035. That's a change. The measure exempts small and micro-volume manufacturers, supercar brands including McLaren and Aston Martin. The government have pointed to an existing £2.3 billion investment in manufacturing and charging infrastructure to support the transition to zero-emissions vehicles. Well, Mari's here with more on this. I have to say, Mari, I kind of had a point that I was going to make on this beforehand, that it was just brought home even more as I transitioned from the first story to the second story. So I think a lot of people will be saying, is that it? You're tweaking some rules around a mandate that's coming in for 2030. I get it. These things take time. So as long as it's not it, and there's more to come, then that's a different story. But, the other thing you could point to on this, I think businesses, car manufacturers in particular, won't say, oh, wow, they're tweaking the rules about this rule that's saying no more sale of petrol vehicles to 2030, they'll say they're keeping this rule that's bad for business.
Yes.
So it's an interesting announcement to want to focus people in on when there is extraordinary turmoil in the markets all around you.
I think you're right, and I think that, we haven't heard yet from government the details of exactly how they are going to support the car manufacturing industry in this country. The concerns around the job losses and the kind of size of job losses we could be seeing because of these tariffs on cars and vehicles is really quite seismic. And the question will be, are they going to be blamed for those job losses if they don't do more to try and protect the industry? As you say, these new announcement coming in, it all sounds really great. However, first of all, this is a kind of Tory policy originally that actually became a little bit unstuck because of the fact that actually the car manufacturing groups and organisations were saying this is not possible, this is too fast, people don't want it, the demand isn't there yet, the infrastructure isn't there yet. Infrastructure is a really key point here because actually the government's saying, we've got plenty of charging points that are being built constantly and the infrastructure is on the right path. But actually, if you look at the consumer worries around electric vehicles, it is very much of a lack of infrastructure. People are concerned about the charging infrastructure, if they can get charging points on the way, if they're driving up to Scotland, half the time you go to places and the charging points aren't actually working. So there are a lot of hiccups and difficulties in the infrastructure, which causes a reticence in consumer confidence. And so this is actually really a bigger issue than the government is, trying to make out. And they're trying to say, actually, this is great. I think in the press release, they say it's, the biggest opportunity, the biggest opportunity of the 21st century for the UK to attract investment. So they're trying to see this as a massive opportunity, which it is. But nonetheless, there are a lot of obstacles and stumbling blocks in the way at the moment.
There's also a bigger picture point. This rhetoric that came out yesterday as well, that globalisation, is over and hasn't worked.
Yeah.
Because you could look at these tariffs coming from the US as an opportunity, one that's going to create pain in the short term, no doubt, but as an opportunity to embrace, to say, we as a country are pro-trade, we as a country are going to do everything we can to try and attract businesses that might be upset by what America's doing, and we're going to trade with other people. But if you're saying globalisation is over, globalisation is dead, it doesn't really wave the flag of free trade. Again, this is a tweaking of an existing regulation, but it's definitely a big regulation and a harness over the auto industry that the previous government brought in. Again, if you're trying to be open to other countries to invest in light of what's going on in the US, you want to remove regulations, not keep them. And you want to cut taxes. And of course, it comes on a day when NIC is going up.
Exactly that. And I think also, the speculation about what taxes might go up again in about 6 months' time. The difficulty is, at the moment, the rhetoric we're seeing coming out of government is, as you say, it feels slightly Trumpian. It's about, focusing on, national interest and kind of looking after ourselves, slightly more insular, perhaps, in terms of the rhetoric we're hearing from the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister's on a car, motor vehicle-themed visit today, and we'll hear more from him this afternoon. And I think it will be interesting to see how much he mimics that rhetoric in comparison to, as you say, looking open to other trading partners, to the EU, to, further afield. And as you say, saying, OK, this market is, at the moment, a bit tricky, but let's exploit the opportunities elsewhere. But it looks like it's going to be a much more kind of UK-focused, insular-looking objective, which is mirroring what Trump is doing.
Well, great stuff, Mari, as always. And we're going to be talking to the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, 7:15, so stay tuned for that. Now, also today, 2 people have been killed and 6 others were injured after an Israeli airstrike hit a tent in southern Gaza. The tent was being used as a base by journalists outside the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. Local health officials say that more than 30 people were killed in separate Israeli strikes on Sunday. The son of an elderly British couple being held in a high-security prison in Afghanistan has told Sky News his parents have never heard one accusation or charge. Barbie and Peter Reynolds have lived in the country for at least 18 years. They were detained by the Taliban's Interior Ministry in February. Their son Jonathan says he's extremely worried for their welfare.
They are under a deep conviction from back in the sort of late 60s when they married in Afghanistan in 1970. that they were going to give their life for the future, a bright future for Afghanistan. So when the Taliban came in by force, the British government and the embassy there said, hey, you've got about a 20 or a 40-minute window. We can get you out. To which my parents responded, why would we leave these people in their darkest hour?
2 people have been arrested after a man was shot dead in County Durham. Emergency services were called to an address in Stanley on Saturday night following reports of a disturbance. A 6-year-old man was pronounced dead at the scene. Police say a man and a woman have been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. Talk starts this afternoon between Birmingham City Council and Unite, the union, over the ongoing bin strike in the city. Refuse workers have been taking strike action since the 11th of March in a dispute over pay. The council have previously declared a major incident as 17,000 tonnes of rubbish line the streets. The King and Queen will arrive in Rome today to begin a state visit to Italy. The trip comes just a week and a half after Buckingham Palace confirmed the monarch had been taken to hospital after suffering side effects related to his ongoing cancer treatment. The King and Queen will mark their 20th wedding anniversary at a state banquet in the country on Wednesday. NHS staff are being harassed by members of the public, filming them with phones and threatening to post footage online. A survey by Unison found that 1 in 7 health workers have experienced unwanted and intrusive filming in the last year. Sadie is here to tell us more about this. This is patients filming nurses and doctors?
Exactly. So I suspect this is happening in other professions as well, but this survey looks at healthcare workers across the UK. And what's happening is that patients, sometimes their families, are using their phones or other digital devices to film their interactions with staff. So this could be during medical consultations at a GP surgery. The survey mentions people driving by and filming road accidents where paramedic workers are working. And then this footage is posted on social media, sometimes it's live streamed. The survey makes reference to the fact that sometimes it's used to sort of like almost blackmail staff to giving them medication or getting their way, patients getting their way. NHS workers say it's not just mobile phones. People are using their webcams, but also hidden recording devices. And this is happening in hospital settings, in patients' homes, on online consultations. The survey is carried out by the health workers union Unison. It says the incidents are leaving staff feeling intimidated and fearful. And as you say, 1 in 7, they say, have experienced unwanted and intrusive filming or photography in the past year. Unison is asking employers to do something about it, to make it clear that people shouldn't be allowed to film. But it may have difficulty getting sympathy from this because a lot of professions come under scrutiny. Imagine if we asked people not to film police activity on the streets or, footballers or online, TV journalists. Everyone is under some level of scrutiny. And for a lot of people, this is not just about evidence gathering, but sometimes simple record keeping.
Is there there's obviously a law, is there not, against doing it in a stealthy way? But are these people doing it in an upfront way? Yeah,
so a lot of people do it in an upfront way. And actually, as journalists, we use some of this footage all the time. When people say that we've recorded something, it shows something that is happening, where there is a particular shortfall. So for a lot of people, it's about accountability. And as I say, for many people, it's about record keeping. In this digital age, sometimes you don't want to get out your notepad and pen and write down something that somebody is saying. You may record what a conversation is, but of course there are laws around recording things without express permission.
Sounded great stuff. Thank you so much. Now, the parents of a 14-year-old boy who carries a knife and put his mother in hospital have told Sky News that police repeatedly failed to take their concerns seriously. Thousands of families are desperate for protection from their own children, but the services that deal with youth violence are struggling to cope. Becky Johnson has more for us.
A teenage boy who became suddenly violent, his anger fuelled by online influencers. To viewers of the hit drama Adolescence, this may sound familiar. To this couple, it's their son.
Harry was wonderful.
He used to be really caring.
And then about 12 and a half, it all changed.
The trigger, they say, was when Harry was hit by a girl. He's now 14 and has become so violent he's been taken into care. We're using actors to protect their identities.
Harry became obsessed with being strong And I think he developed a difficulty around certain female people because of the assault.
The whole alpha male type of behaviour.
He began attacking his mother, beating her so badly she ended up in hospital, and he's threatened to stab a teacher too.
My worst fear is that he's going to end up killing one of us. If not us, then somebody else. There's going to be somebody out there that's the wrong day, the wrong time, and he's going to end up killing them.
It's a shocking thought for any parent to have, but they're not alone. This organisation supports parents who've been victims of their own children's violence. 3,500 people contacted them last year, a 70% increase on the year before. Families desperate for help.
What we're hearing time and time again is that referrals are not being picked up because thresholds aren't being met, because perhaps the parent or caregiver isn't a risk to the child. So therefore, families are falling through gaps.
At this boxing gym, they take children referred by schools, social workers, even police.
Why should charities be picking up the pieces that somehow the system isn't dealing with?
It's so difficult because I think that the services that are currently tackling these issues are absolutely inundated. I think the biggest cause of the violent behaviour is mental health. We're seeing a massive correlation within that. Social media is having a huge impact, especially around that young person's identity.
By 14, Ethan had been arrested several times for getting into fights.
Someone could look at me, I'd be angry. Social media, yeah, that's definitely got a massive, massive part. I mean, my main thing was I see people with amazing bodies and stuff because they're working out, and I felt like I couldn't reach that point. It made me self-conscious, which would add on to the anger because I was angry at myself, which then turned into hatred towards other people. Just time and effort. That's all we need, and the understanding that it's a war in our heads.
A government spokesperson told us it's unacceptable that young people haven't been getting the care and treatment they need. Families believe the system isn't set up to deal with violent children. Becky Johnson, Sky News.
We're going to have much more on that story throughout the morning, and at 7:45 we'll be talking to John Yates, the Chief Executive of the Youth Endowment Fund, a charity that works to prevent children becoming involved in violence. Right, let's have a look at the weather.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, it's looking mostly fine this week, likely turning more unsettled by the weekend. Expect a few changes, however, as high pressure over the North Sea sinks south, changing the wind direction. Most places will be fine if chilly over the next few hours after a frosty start for many, but there'll be fog in places while the Northern Isles look rather grey. Any fog will soon lift, leaving almost unbroken sunshine, but the far north will stay quite cloudy. Inland areas will become warm in the sunshine, and it'll turn a little warmer near many eastern coasts. It'll be less windy than yesterday. The afternoon will bring little change, with most places staying sunny into the evening.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, the family of a Venezuelan man deported from the US to a notorious El Salvador prison tells Sky News why they think he was targeted. And at 6:45, we'll look at what the papers have to say about the government's efforts to shield the UK from a trade war.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power. No freedom! Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Welcome back. The family of a Venezuelan man deported from the US has told Sky News he was targeted by authorities because of his tattoos. Hundreds of Venezuelans have been accused of being gang members and sent to prison in El Salvador under Donald Trump's sweeping crackdown on immigration. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner has this report.
Until 5 weeks ago, Arturo Suarez was a professional singer performing in the US while seeking asylum from his native Venezuela. He followed the legal process to enter, but while recording a music video last month, he was arrested. It's believed he's one of over 200 men deported, not to their home country, but to this notorious El Salvador prison. It's part of President Trump's anti-immigration showpiece.
So you believe that Arturo is on this picture? You think he's this guy?
Yes.
That must be...
This is my bro.
That must be very sad to see.
Yeah.
Arturo's brother Nelson believes this is him, bound by his hands and feet, head shaved. The White House says Arturo is a gang member, but they've not provided any evidence to support this.
This is my brother. It's crazy. It's horrible.
Nelson says his brother's only crime is being Venezuelan and having tattoos.
Aproximadamente 33.
33 tattoos?
33 tattoos. Pero...
He liked tattoos?
No represent ganga 30 agua.
It wasn't the gangs?
No.
A hummingbird tattoo in memory of his late mother, a piano and verses from the Bible. Nelson believes this is what landed his brother in prison.
Policía Nacional de Colombia.
He shows me letters from the authorities in Colombia, Chile and Venezuela, stating Arturo has no criminal record in any of the countries he's lived in. Nelson is in America also claiming asylum. He worries about being deported too, and for his brother's safety.
We don't know what conditions he is in, if he has been mistreated, if his rights are being violated.
The men deported on planes to El Salvador were seemingly denied due process. President Trump is defying the judiciary at every turn. Other families say their loved ones were targeted for their tattoos too. Herthe Reyes had a Real Madrid badge with rosary beads, the White House says a gang symbol. And this 31-year-old makeup artist had tattoos on his wrist reading Mum and Dad, both men now in the El Salvador mega prison. The Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem visited too.
Do not come to our country illegally.
Posing in front of inmates.
How did you feel seeing Kristi Noem doing a photo shoot in that prison, knowing that your brother is probably there?
I feel bad, horrible, because in those images we only see criminals. With my brother, I feel like it's more a political issue. They needed numbers. They said these are the numbers. And now let's throw them to the lions.
The Trump administration has now admitted it sent at least one man to the El Salvador prison by mistake, calling it an administrative error. Incredibly, the government also now says it lacks the power to order his return. I contacted the White House to ask about Arturo's case and the other men sent to this prison for ambiguous reasons and without any court hearing. They didn't respond. Nelson's questions about why his brother was taken from him and thrown in prison are still unanswered. Martha Kellner, Sky News.
Well, still to come here on The Breakfast Show, stock markets around the world are plunging as Donald Trump compares his tariffs to medicine. We'll get a reaction from Singapore after the break. In the sport, Premier League action as Liverpool stumble at Craven Cottage.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power. No freedom! Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
Gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Coming up, we'll go live to Singapore for a closer look at markets in Asia. But first, a reminder of our top stories this morning. Well, markets in Asia falling dramatically after a weekend that saw no backing down in terms of the tough talk on tariffs, both from the White House and from Beijing. The Hong Kong index is down 10%, an enormous single over-the-day move. This was President Trump on Air Force One.
I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something.
Prime Minister will relax the rules around the UK's transition to zero-emission vehicles today after car makers were hit by Donald Trump's tariffs. The UK faces a 10% duty on exports to the US, with all cars imported to the US facing a further 25% levy. Petrol and diesel car sales will end by 2030, but regulations will be changed to ease the transition. NHS staff are being harassed by members of the public, filming them with phones and threatening to post footage online. A survey by Unison found that 1 in 7 health workers have experienced unwanted and intrusive filming in the last year. With rubbish piled high in Birmingham, talks between the Unite Union and Birmingham City Council begin today. Birmingham City Council said picket lines blocking its depots and preventing waste vehicles from collecting rubbish. With 17,000 tonnes of trash lining the streets. Right, let's have a look at the Asian markets for you once again before we discuss them with Megan Morris, who's Deputy Bureau Chief at Business Insider in Singapore. There they are for you at the moment. Wow. Hong Kong is continuing its slide, now down 11.5%. An astonishing move for a single day. It is a bit of catch up or catch down, I should say, after some Asian markets were closed on Friday. It's also a response to China's response to the US, which came late on Friday, and of course saw reciprocal tariffs introduced as opposed to any form of backing down. But interesting to see Australia there, which has taken a similar approach to the UK, been conciliatory, only got 10% tariffs, also down a massive 4%. Shanghai down 7%, Japan down 6.5%. Of course, UK markets and European markets open in an hour and a half at 8 a.m. But 11.5% move for the Hong Kong index is quite astonishing. Let's talk about it with the Deputy Chief, Bureau Chief at Business Insider in Singapore, Megan Morris. Megan, thanks so much for joining us. A bloodbath on Asian markets this morning.
If red makes you anxious, today is not the day to check your portfolio. The pain only continues from last week.
And what is the response today really about? Is it the kind of fully factoring in what President Trump announced last Wednesday night in the US, or is it kind of seeing China decide to double down and retaliate as it has?
We are seeing some cumulative effects here. Firstly, markets were closed in China, Hong Kong, and Indonesia on Friday, regularly scheduled public holiday, nothing to do with the tariffs. We are also seeing a reaction that as markets digest news over the weekend, we are very, very clear that Trump and his administration are digging in their heels. I think some investors were hoping for some comments this weekend that could indicate maybe an easing of tariffs or more room for negotiation. Trump offered nothing of the sort. He said he doesn't like the stock markets being down, but it's important to take medicine to fix what's wrong, in his words. So we are seeing investors, I think, understand that we're in it for the long term here, and that means a sell-off across markets, even in what were previously thought of as haven assets like gold.
It's really interesting, Megan, obviously seeing these market moves. I guess it hints at what investors think is to come for the respected economies, the various economies we're referring to. What is the latest expectation for China's economy? How big a blow will these tariffs be?
Much of this is still to be determined because it still seems like we're in the early days of what could be a protracted trade war. Diplomatic channels have all but iced up between China and Washington. So there's no indication here that Xi and Trump are getting on the phone or kind of hashing things out. It's not looking good for China, and we'll see more about that in the coming days and weeks as we get data on industrial manufacturing and things like that that clue us in a little bit more. But big picture, it's not good. Investors are anxious, and even things like China's AI advances in the last 2 months haven't been enough to offset the pain that we're seeing today.
And take us through what some of the other countries' responses have been. I mean, I know Australia is in a similar position to the UK, just the 10% tariff and still trying not to retaliate. We know that China's retaliated very, very forcefully. What about other economies like Japan and Taiwan and Korea that have been hit with pretty big tariffs, but they're also meant to be allies of the US?
We are seeing a full spectrum of responses across Asia and across the world, because keep in mind, these tariffs affect something like 180 countries in differing amounts. So we see leaders like Malaysia who are starting to speak fairly critically of Trump, with Malaysia's prime minister saying that perhaps the move wasn't, he said, quote, properly analyzed. This is in reference to the fact that some of these tariff countries include those that are uninhabited, those that have penguins instead of people. We're also seeing countries like Vietnam look to negotiate quite publicly. Vietnam is saying it will back down on tariffs if Trump and the administration will similarly back down. Vietnam is a major manufacturing hub and parts supplier to some of those countries you mentioned, including to Korea and Japan, really stands to see a huge hit to its manufacturing-based economy with these tariffs. So we're seeing a full spectrum of responses, and I expect that we could get more in the coming days as leaders have had time to digest and think about what might get Trump on the phone or willing to engage here.
And I mean, I'm sure it's too early to answer this definitively, but what's your sense, Megan, as to whether people in Asia are going to lose faith in America and the ability to trust America in the medium to long term, even if we see U-turns immediately? I'm reminded of the situation Korea finds itself in, who struck a free trade deal with Trump in the first term, and yet now they have these tariffs imposed on them. It can't, even if you see a U-turn, even if you see tariffs removed, it can't sort of breed great long-term trust, can it?
This shakes business and political confidence, I think, for every leader, be they a CEO of a multinational company, a garment factory owner, or a politician. And then keep in mind, we're also seeing some political tumult in some of these countries, not least in South Korea. So I think there are some incredible long-term effects here in terms of who sees the U.S. as an ally and who is willing to spend maybe the same amount or even less in the future. We're also starting to see a consumer reaction here. Consumers across the world are traveling to the United States less in reaction to both tariffs and immigration policies. And that could continue to hit some of the U.S.'s higher margin sectors, including luxury goods and some other areas. So this is a multifaceted set of effects. And I think it's so early days that besides the red that we're seeing in markets, it's really too soon to tell what this means for the long term.
Megan, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Megan Morris from Business Insider in Singapore. Let's just remind you of what the snapshot of Asian markets is. Once again, Hong Kong is down more than 10%. Single day's move, albeit was closed on Friday. Japan down 6.6%. Shanghai down 6.5%. Australia, which similar to the UK, is in a better position than most, is also down 4%. The selling, if people thought might end with the pronounced moves we saw on Thursday and Friday after a weekend's break, has not ended. In fact, it's picked up a pace, particularly if you look at that extraordinary 10% move on a single day for the Hong Kong market. Of course, we await the opening of European markets at 8 a.m, an hour and 20 minutes from now. I'll, of course, cover that for you closely when it happens. Darren McCaffrey, in fact, is on a trading floor in London for us, so we'll have that for you. And, of course, US futures, just to give you a snapshot of what they're doing at the moment, expected to open down as well. So this is not just Asian markets catching up, where some Asian markets have been closed on Friday. US futures are down at the moment about 3.3% for the S&P 500, following sharp declines already on Thursday and Friday last week. Now, for a different tone, some sport.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
Having Harper made football more enjoyable. You don't get stuck on a bad game or a bad training, you just get to go home and see a smiley little face. Football just became so much better for me, and getting to travel the world with her has just been the best thing in the world.
Katrina, can you talk me through the day that you walked into that IVF clinic a few years ago? What was going on in your head?
There wasn't much going on in my head. I tried to not really think about what was about to happen. My period's always spot on the day, and on that day that I walked in, I got my period, and I think it was about a week early. Literally, when I spoke to the doctor, he said, "We can start today." I think which was probably meant to happen, because I wasn't able to really think about the process, what I needed to do, all the medication I needed to go on. To be honest, I hadn't researched it that much. I just went into the clinic to kind of get a bit more information and see if it was even possible.
Did you feel quite fearless, do you think, in that moment?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's something that I thought about so often. I knew in that moment it was where I was meant to be. Obviously, being a single mum at the time, I think a lot of people would have had thoughts about it and shared those with me, and I didn't want them to change the way I felt and how badly I wanted to be a mum. I had a really rough time in football for a couple of years. I then took an opportunity over in Norway, and I was loving football again, but there was just something missing. You know, I went to sleep thinking about kids, about the names that I wanted, what life would be like.
Sky Business sponsors this report.
From the sport to the weather.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's looking mostly fine this week, likely turning more unsettled next weekend. Expect a few changes, however, as high pressure over the North Sea sinks south, changing the wind direction. Most places will be fine if chilly over the next few hours after a frosty start for many, but there'll be fog in places while the Northern Isles look rather grey. Any fog will soon lift, leaving almost unbroken sunshine, but the far north will stay quite cloudy. Inland areas will become warm in the sunshine and it'll turn a little warmer near many eastern coasts.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, we'll take a look at all the stories making headlines in today's newspapers. It's our news review. Mari's back with that.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power. No freedom! Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Mari's back. It's time for the news review. And Mari, we're starting with one of yours, which is in fact one of the Prime Minister's.
It is, yes.
Op-ed in today's Times.
Exactly that, yes. So the Prime Minister's been writing in the Times this morning, and it's going on from what we were talking about earlier.
My only priority is making the British people better off, is the title.
There you go. And so he starts by saying it's the beginning of a new era, and then he says, sitting back and hoping for the best is a declinist mentality, and it really stokes insecurity for working people. He says, Governments that saw the global sands shifting decided to stick their heads in it. And so he's criticising leaders of past and saying, actually, we've got to be proactive when it comes to facing a new world order, when it comes to these tariffs from the US. But it's quite interesting because we've got this, as you say, these lines where he says, my only priority is the people of Britain and what makes them better off. And then simultaneously trying to also say that actually, we need to work globally. So he says, for instance, this country succeeds when we are outward looking, engaging with the world, while he's also trying to say that globalisation is over. So there's this slightly bizarre tension there. And then he talks about how actually Labour is rewiring the state, getting rid of blockages and barriers. And he states 3 areas, 3 examples, as far as he's concerned, of how they're doing that. So the first is abolishing NHS England. The second is reforming planning rules to get house building. And the third, he says, is curbing immigration. Although many would argue he hasn't actually done that yet. It might be an ambition, but it hasn't yet been achieved. And then he also says, I will only sign deals with the US or anyone else that is in our national interest. He's really trying to essentially hammer home the point that he is a patriotic leader who cares about the UK and the UK first in the way that, is similar to Trump's America First ideology, as it were, and trying to say, I am here to serve you, I am here elected by you, I have a mandate to look after you as a nation, and that is exactly what I'm going to do. So he's trying to persuade the reader that he has their best interests at heart.
It's really interesting because the announcement that comes with this rhetoric is, I don't think will be seen by business as being pro-business. I think it'll be seen as tweaks around the edges and an announcement that says, we are keeping the regulation introduced by the last government. We are keeping the regulation that says no petrol cars can be sold after 2030. Now, maybe that's right for environmental reasons, but it is an anti-business regulation that limits businesses' freedom to operate as they would like. And just on that note, this is the FT on that story. Page 2, right at the bottom, is how much this gets covered. And it says electric vehicle targets ease to help tariff hit car makers. It comes, by the way, under their climate change section, not market sell-off, not the market sell-off that dominates the front page. And I just think that's worth showing as a snapshot of the scale of this announcement in the business paper, in the FT, is very minor. So we'll talk about that with Heidi Alexander coming up. And again, it's just interesting. I have total sympathy with them that these tariffs have come, and they've got to respond, and it takes time to get these policies right. But if you're going to try and trumpet a policy alongside this announcement, I just think it's quite an interesting one to do. And of course, it comes on the same day that a tax is going up on businesses. So unfortunate timing for them on that. It's something we're going to obviously cover throughout the day. And Heidi Alexander, as we said, comes up at 7:15. You've gone for next in The Telegraph.
Yes, I have. So this is an interesting story. All about creative ways of trying to improve or even save the NHS, depending on what school of thought you're coming from. So this is a kind of pilot scheme that's being trialled at the moment, where essentially you get kind of health visitors that will go to people's houses. They'll knock on your door and check up on you, see if you need things, see if you need any help. This is all about focusing on things like unemployment, debt, bereavement. So those are some of the areas that the government is concerned about. And really, Wes Streeting's been speaking to The Telegraph here, and it's quite interesting some of the quotes he's got. He's saying that actually early versions of the scheme are encouraging. He says it's cutting the numbers of what he calls frequent flyers, so those who are often in A&E and filling up A&E beds again and again and again. An interesting way of referencing them there, but hey. And then it talks about here, community health workers will be allocated a patch of 120 homes, and then they will pay monthly visits to them, see what they need. And from what the scheme has come back so far, they say there's been a 10% drop in hospital admissions over a space of a year, and that's 7% a drop in A&E hospital admissions as well. And then there's a bit of a back and forth about whether this is too much nanny state, right? So Dr. Harris, who has actually developed this scheme with the government, he says, yes, it is state interference. People could say it's nanny state on steroids. But what he's saying is actually it's giving control back to the resident, And the argument is that it will save the NHS money. And if it saves us all money, then can't that be a good thing?
Well, it's an interesting one in terms of the headlines as well today, because I just think everything's going to be dominated by one story.
Yeah, I know.
I've gone on that note, by the way, in the Daily Mail next. It's kind of got a small position again. Musk calls for free trade between US and Europe in split from Trump.
Yeah.
And for me, this is now the thing to watch, because not just Elon Musk specifically, we've seen Bill Ackman, who's quite a high-profile investor and has been a very loud supporter of Donald Trump, break ranks over the weekend and say this questions America's trust in the business community in the world. We've seen some Republican members of Congress start to question it and say, should they legislate to remove the executive power that Trump has on tariffs? Of course, it's just a stroke of a pen, these tariffs coming into force from the president's office. They're not needing to go through Congress. And it's a different tone from his most vociferous supporters in just the last 2 or 3 days. Now, introducing them on Wednesday night last week, and his rhetoric since suggests this is a different Donald Trump, that he is not going to buckle. Whereas in his first term, he'd always look at the stock market and he'd always want the stock market to be doing well. And he's clearly much more resolute. But it will be interesting to see in the next couple of weeks, the next couple of days, if some of those people around him start to change their tune and whether it has an impact on it. I don't think it looks like it will, based on what we've seen, but it's something to watch. And if more people like him, and by the way, Elon Musk hasn't criticised the policy explicitly. Yeah. There's noises coming on this point. Bill Ackman, an investor, has criticised them specifically, but that's got to be the big swing factor now for markets, for economies. Do we start to see them U-turn, or do they remain resolute?
Absolutely.
Next story. We've got time for another one, guys. What time is it? We do one more. Daily Mirror, you've gone for.
Yes, this is a bit of public service journalism. Anyone who's going to Spain this summer. So really interesting. There's apparently lots of planned protests in Spain over the summer. This is around over-tourism and frustration among a lot of the Spanish population that has essentially increased the price of rents and houses in Spain. So they're talking about hundreds of thousands of people were demonstrating on the weekend already. It's Easter holidays now, so people might already be popping over to Spain or the Canary Islands. There's fears that people could block airports, beaches or other attractions in the summertime. Rents have doubled in Spain. House prices have risen by more than 44% in the past decade. And what a lot of these people are saying is, we can't afford to live here anymore. Everyone's being pushed out and something needs to change. We need a new tourism model. So just for anyone who is heading off, perhaps for the Easter holidays, beware.
Do we have a translation for the word protests in Spanish?
I have no idea. I do not speak Spanish. I'm so sorry.
We are out of time on that.
Demonstración. I have no idea.
Lots more news on the other side of this break.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
A very good morning to you. It's 7 o'clock on today's show. Big drops in Asian markets overnight as fears of a global trade war continue.
In an hour's time, markets open here and in Europe. In just a few moments, we'll be joined by the Transport Secretary.
Plus, worries over a new type of harassment faced by NHS staff being filmed against their will and then posted online.
It's Monday, the 7th of April. Your headlines: international stock markets fall dramatically overnight as President Trump brushed off concerns of a trade war.
I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something.
After British car makers were hit by those tariffs, the Prime Minister relaxes the rules on the transition to zero-emission vehicles. Plus,
my worst fear is that he's going to end up killing one of us. If not us, then somebody else.
after the hit show Adolescence, we hear the real-life nightmare scenario for any parent dealing with an increasingly violent child. A very good morning to you. Our top story: stock markets falling sharply overnight in Asia after a weekend that saw no reprieve in President Trump's painful tariffs. The largest was Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index, which has shed over 10%. We await the open of the London market at 8 a.m. in an hour's time, and markets across Europe as well. Meanwhile, US futures signalling they're expecting a weak open themselves, again with the S&P 500 futures markets down itself some 3% as we speak. This is President Trump speaking on Air Force One overnight.
I spoke to a lot of leaders, European, Asian, from all over the world. They're dying to make a deal. But I said, we're not going to have deficits with your country. We're not going to do that, because to me a deficit is a loss. We're going to have surpluses, or we're at worst going to be breaking even. What's going to happen with the market, I can't tell you, but I can tell you our country has gotten a lot stronger. I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something. And we have such a horrible, we have been treated so badly by other countries because we had stupid leadership that allowed this to happen.
Let's have a look at where Asian markets... Oh, gosh, Hong Kong is down 12%. This is astonishing single-day moves. As we mentioned earlier, it's worth noting that Hong Kong was closed on Friday, so this, you could say, is 2 days' worth of moves. But 11.8% on a single day is quite astonishing to see. The Nikkei down 6.6%, Shanghai down 7.3%, Australia, which, like the UK, is in a good position, in inverted commas, down 4% itself. As we've mentioned, European markets, UK, open at 8 a.m. in just under an hour's time. Let's bring in Helen Ann Smith, our Asia correspondent. She's in Beijing. Helen Ann, I don't think I've ever seen 12% in Hong Kong on a single day. Maybe I'm wrong, but these remind you of the peak of the pandemic. I remember being on the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange there, where circuit breakers click in on the S&P 500 on a 7% decline. Obviously, no such circuit breakers for Hong Kong. To see an 11.8% move on a single day is quite astonishing. Of course, it's not just President Trump's rhetoric that's causing it overnight. It's China's own rhetoric over the course of the weekend.
Absolutely. I think there's a sense this morning that Asian markets are responding to a new reality, that this is not just a threat of some tariffs that might be negotiated and withdrawn. We are facing a full-scale trade war between the world's two biggest economies, the world's two biggest superpowers, China and the US. And that is a very serious reality that they're grappling with. Huge losses amongst almost all markets this morning. Hong Kong, Taiwan, China, Singapore, Japan, all down. Some losses, as you say, in excess of 10%. Really serious numbers indeed. And they are responding not just to what Donald Trump announced on Wednesday afternoon US time, but they're crucially responding to China's response. Now, China's response came quite swiftly, but it came late on Friday afternoon Asia time. So the markets that were open on Friday had just about already closed or about to. But actually, crucially, markets in Hong Kong and China and Taiwan were closed altogether on Friday because it was a national holiday here. So there's a sense that they are all now absorbing just what that retaliation means. Now, just to remind you of the numbers, Donald Trump imposed a 34% retaliatory tariff on China, and China responded in kind, 34%. And both of those sit on top of the tariffs that were announced earlier in Trump's term. So we're talking about levies in excess of 50% on all goods between the world's two biggest economies. And that matters not just to this region, but to the world. Many countries like Japan and South Korea, they would take China and the US as their two top trading partners. So it's just a huge impact. It affects trade flows, it affects demand, it affects earnings. It's just huge. And it's that sense that's really trickling down at the moment. And I think the real concern is not just that the retaliation came, but what it signals about perhaps a reluctance on both sides to negotiate. And I think there was some hope, certainly during Trump's sort of first round of tariffs, that there might be some sort of deal. But this time round, I think China has decided not to be restrained as it was earlier in the year. It's sort of decided to say, you know what, we're going to absorb the pain that's coming because we just can't be seen to be taking this lying down. And I think, therefore, that's really spooked a lot of the markets, the sense that any sort of deal is unlikely to come, not helped as well by what Donald Trump said over the weekend about how countries need to be taking their medicine, that he's doing a good thing, specifically referenced China, actually, and said that there wouldn't be a deal while a trade deficit with China still exists. So I think a real sense that there's that we're not kind of walking back from the precipice, if you like, at the moment. And remember, of course, behind market falls are real people, real economies, real jobs. There will be an enormous amount of pain to come for this region and likely for the world as well.
Helen, great stuff. Thanks so much for that from Beijing. Let's just have a look at the markets board for you again, because it's truly quite astonishing. As we mentioned, nearly 12% the decline for the Hong Kong market this morning, 11.8%. We have clarified that for you. It is the worst one-day move in Hong Kong since October 2008, a year, of course, that requires no further context in terms of financial markets. That's the scale of the single-day move that we've seen in Hong Kong today. Japan, 6.6%, Shanghai, 7.3%, Australia, a 4% decline. We are awaiting the open of European markets in a little under an hour. We'll have it for you, of course, live when it happens. But the sentiment that started late last Wednesday in the United States continues this morning on a new trading week in Asia. We'll see what happens in Europe and in the US, but it doesn't look good. Now, the Prime Minister will relax rules around electric vehicles after car makers were hit by Donald Trump's tariffs. Let's have a look at the plan. Well, by the end of 2030, the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles will end. That was already introduced by the last government. The sale of plug-in hybrids will now continue until 2035. The new measures also exempt small and micro-volume manufacturers behind brands like McLaren and Aston Martin. And the government appointed to an existing £2.3 billion investment in manufacturing and charging infrastructure to support the transition to zero-emission vehicles. Well, Mari is here with more on this. And Mari, again, we talk about the biggest one-day decline in the Hong Kong market since 2008, and you think, what's the government going to do? Is it going to be a massive torpedo, a massive bazooka to try and reassure business, or will it be tinkering around the edges? This feels like the latter.
Exactly that. I mean, they're talking about how they're, changing things and protecting business, and actually, like you've pointed out before, it is a small tweak to already existing rules from the Conservatives. And actually, this caused quite a lot of headache for the Conservatives when they were in power. I remember when Kemi Badenoch was the Business and Trade Secretary in charge of these rules, and they ended up having to U-turn on them because governments were hearing from industry that actually it was going too fast. It was not realistically, it was not practicable. But the government are saying that actually they are sticking to the headline rule, which is no more new petrol and diesel cars by 2030. They say it's going to give manufacturers certainty, stability and support. That is what they're saying that this is going to essentially provide to the car manufacturing industry. The difficulty is that certainty, stability and support isn't coming when it comes to the impact of those tariffs. We still yet don't know how many losses of jobs we might see because of those tariffs on imports of UK cars to the US. And also, the government is arguing that the transition to net zero is this huge, monumental opportunity for the UK economy in terms of investment, and that may be the case. But right now, in the short term, those car manufacturers that are concerned here in the UK might look at this announcement, might look at some of these headlines and think, is that enough for me? Is that enough to really keep us going?
I mean, I think if you're making any announcement on this, and it is obviously a policy that was introduced by the last government, car manufacturers might have thought they're going to get rid of it. But if you're making an announcement on it, they'll read this as saying, we're doubling down, we're keeping this mandate. Even if you tweak around the edges, you know, this is an example, and maybe it's right for the environment. It's an example of restricting free market practice because you're saying you can't sell a certain type of car. And they're kind of keeping that in place, which might be the right case for all sorts of reasons. But it's also interesting just to want to focus in on this announcement. If you're going to make a big pledge to say we're going to support industry, we're going to do what's right for domestic manufacturing, that's great, and these things take time, but it doesn't come with what feels like a big announcement.
Exactly. It sounds to me like we're going to support you by telling you what to do, rather than we're actually going to support you by potentially, you know, saving jobs or protecting you in other ways. And I think that's how that's going to be taken this morning.
Of course, comes on a day when various taxes are going up, or at least one important one.
Yeah, national insurance contributions for employers. And this is, you know, the Conservatives have branded this a jobs tax. But even the OBR looking at this have said this is going to have a negative impact on employment. It is putting a financial burden on employers at a time where a lot of them say that the margins are already really quite tight, especially when it comes to kind of smaller, medium-sized businesses. They are really, really concerned, especially around things like care homes, nurseries, things that are critical, really, to public services functioning and people getting the care that they need, women being able to go back to work after having children. All those things have a knock-on economic impact if people are economically inactive because they can't get, for instance, like childcare or care for their elderly relatives. And those things then matter and have this kind of long tail in other directions.
Mark, great stuff. We're going to talk to the government at 15:15, so any minute now. Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, will be with us. Let's get you up to speed on all the day's other stories. And 2 people have been killed and 6 others were injured after an Israeli airstrike hit a tent in southern Gaza. The tent was being used as a base by journalists outside the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis. Local health officials say that more than 30 people were killed in separate Israeli strikes on Sunday. The son of an elderly British couple being held in high-security prison in Afghanistan told Sky News his parents have never heard one accusation or charge. Barbie and Peter Reynolds have lived in the country for at least 18 years. They were detained by the Taliban's Interior Ministry in February. Their son Jonathan says he's extremely worried for their welfare.
They are under a deep conviction from back in the sort of late 60s when they married in Afghanistan in 1970, that they were going to give their life for the future, a bright future for Afghanistan. So when the Taliban came in by force, the British government and the embassy there said, hey, you've got about a 20 or a 40-minute window, we can get you out. To which my parents responded, why would we leave these people in their darkest hour?
2 people have been arrested after a man was shot dead in County Durham. Emergency services were called to an address in Stanley on Saturday night following reports of a disturbance. A 6-year-old man was pronounced dead at the scene. Police say a man and a woman have been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. Talks start this afternoon between Birmingham City Council and Unite, the union, over the ongoing bin strike in the city. Refuse workers have been taking strike action since the 11th of March in a dispute over pay. The council have previously declared a major incident as 17,000 tonnes of rubbish line the street. NHS staff are being harassed by members of the public, filming them with phones and threatening to post footage online. A survey by Unison found that 1 in 7 health workers have experienced unwanted and intrusive filming in the last year. Well, Sadia's here with more on this. Sadia, what exactly are we talking about?
So this is patients, sometimes their family members, using their phones to record discussions with GPs, doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers. And this comes from a survey that says that this is happening to thousands of workers. 1 in 7 say that they feel left intimidated and fearful. And it's not just in a hospital setting where people are filming these things, but also things like drive-bys. If there's been a road accident and paramedics are working there, often people come and start filming. And there were reports that they are filming altercations in emergency departments, recording of vehicle license plates belonging to doctors and nurses. Then this footage, they say, is being put onto social media, and it is sometimes live streamed, sometimes used to threaten staff, and also used as bargaining tools to get medicines. So patients using this footage, in essence, to get what they want. NHS workers say it's not just phones, that webcams are being used, and sometimes hidden recording devices also being used. The survey is carried out by the workers' union Unison, which says that the incidents are leaving staff feeling intimidated and fearful. And as you say, 1 in 7 have experienced this unwanted and intrusive filming or photography. But many people will say that it's important to record these things. Professions, all sorts of professions, come under scrutiny.
Sadia, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. We're going to talk to the government in just a moment, but before we do, let's just get you up to speed again with the picture for markets around the world. And the selling continues. Hong Kong is hitting lows of the day now, down 12.2%, a quite astonishing one-day move. The Nikkei down 7%, as you can see. Shanghai 7.5%, Australia over 4%. A reminder, this move in the Hong Kong market down 12.2% does come after the Hong Kong market was closed on Friday, but it also comes as Donald Trump has doubled down on his strong rhetoric as China responded Friday afternoon. But as we mentioned earlier, this is the worst one-day move in Hong Kong since 2008, since the financial crisis. We await the open of European markets in just under an hour, 45 minutes. Let's get the reaction of the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, who joins us now. Good morning, Minister. Thanks so much for joining us. Quite astonishing, these moves. It's getting worse this morning, not better. Biggest one-day move in Hong Kong since the financial crisis. Is that the scale of threat that the economy faces as well?
Well, we'd obviously rather not be in this place, and we were disappointed by the global imposition of tariffs. I think what we need to do at this point in time is to have cool heads. We are obviously working through our negotiations with the US in terms of a wider trade agreement, but it's in nobody's best interests for there to be an escalating trade war where tariffs are constantly being ratcheted up. And it's why the Prime Minister is totally right to have said that we need to move faster and go further to support British manufacturing. And that is why today we are making the changes to the zero-emission vehicles mandate.
I want to get into that. And I note your point as well that, you know, cool heads, UK versus US discussions, and we'll see where those end up. But clearly, the two biggest economies in the world are not taking cool heads. They're retaliating against each other, leading to a bloodbath in markets. I guess it's a big picture question, regardless of what we here in the UK do. Are we now facing a global recession?
So the imposition of global tariffs and the reciprocal tariffs that some countries have and retaliatory tariffs that some countries have decided to apply are bad news for the global economy, because it's bad for global demand, it's bad for prices, and it's bad for consumers. And so that is why we have to do everything that we can to protect the interests of the British people and British businesses. And that is why we are setting out a package of support today for the car industry to provide certainty to British manufacturers and to ensure that they can remain at the cutting edge of the transition to electric vehicles, and also make sure that consumers can benefit from the cheaper running costs of electric vehicles as well. And so that's why the Prime Minister has been clear that we need to do absolutely everything we can as a government to shelter British businesses from these global economic headwinds.
OK, so what are the details of what you're changing today?
So we are being clear that we are maintaining the 2030 phase-out date for the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles. That was a commitment that we made in the manifesto. You'll remember that the last government kept chopping and changing. Rishi Sunak U-turned on his own policy, didn't he? Which saw demand for EVs, electric vehicles, drop by about 15%. So we're saying that we are providing certainty to industry with that 2030 phase-out date. We are also allowing the sale of full hybrids, cars like the Toyota Prius and the Nissan e-Power, to be sold through to 2035, and also confirming that we will allow the sale of plug-in hybrids to be sold through to that date. We're exempting small manufacturers, small British manufacturers from the same set of rules. So British brands, luxury brands such as Bentley or McLaren or Lotus or even the old Caterhams, that they don't have to comply with the same set of rules. We're reducing fines for the car manufacturers if they can't comply with the headline targets in the zero-emission vehicle mandate. And we're also giving car manufacturers different flexibilities so that they can, if they're performing well in making the rest of their car fleet cleaner by reducing carbon emissions in the petrol and diesel vehicles that they're still selling through to 2030, that they can use that overperformance there to count towards the achievement of the headline trajectory in the zero emissions vehicle mandate.
I mean, it all, to me, sounds very complicated, tweaks to various sets of rules. And I think it'd be fair to say that if you're announcing anything in this area, that the auto industry in this country will look at this and say, oh gosh, you're keeping this 2030 mandate, which is a big restriction on free markets, as opposed to removing it at a time when the car industry is on its knees. Was that a consideration?
So if you look at the response of the car manufacturers today, I know that Jaguar Land Rover, who is one of the big companies that is affected by the imposition of the 25% tariffs on cars, they have come out and supported the changes that we have made today. It is an opportunity for the car industry to remain at the cutting edge of the transition to EVs, but it's right that we're pragmatic. It's right that we are looking at how we can be flexible in the way in which car manufacturers make this transition, because we want cheaper EVs to be available for consumers. We want people to be able to benefit from those lower running costs as well. And so it's important that as a government we do everything that we can, not only to support British businesses and manufacturing, to grow the economy, but also to cut those carbon emissions. And I think we've struck the right balance in the package that we're announcing today.
So clearly that's a set of measures focused on one particular industry. Meanwhile, obviously the whole economy and markets around the world are hit by what's going on. Is it unfortunate timing that the increase on NIC for businesses comes into play today, this week, after what happened last week?
So we've been very clear about why we have had to ask businesses to deal with increased employers' national insurance contributions. It's absolutely vital that we got the additional investment into the NHS, £26 billion extra going into the NHS, which has seen waiting lists for hospital appointments fall for the last 5 months in a row. And so we realise that we're asking a lot of businesses at the moment. I would just point out that 43% of employers won't pay national insurance contributions this year. We did make some changes to support the smallest businesses, but it's absolutely vital if we're going to get that investment in our public services, which is the mandate that we were elected on at the last election. We have had to be clear about where that money is coming from.
Is there any consideration to relax the fiscal rules given this world-changing set of events?
So our commitment to the fiscal rules are non-negotiable. We believe in sound management of the public finances, and we can't have a situation going forward where, as a country, we are spending routinely more on a year-on-year basis on our sort of day-to-day costs than the money that we've got coming in through tax receipts. And so you do have to balance the books. Rachel Reeves has been right to focus on that, because we saw what happened when Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng took a reckless and cavalier approach to the budget a couple of years ago. We saw the markets descend into utter turmoil, and it was people who had mortgages who were or who were trying to buy homes who ended up paying the price of that. And so that is why we have said the fiscal rules are non-negotiable. We are going to manage the public finances in a sound and sensible way, and that's what this government is doing.
And just finally, if I may, two MPs were detained by Israel and sent home. Now that they're back, any further clarity on exactly what happened there?
So I haven't spoken to either Abtesam or Juan myself. I know that the Foreign Secretary yesterday said that it was absolutely unacceptable and counterproductive. And so, look, I hope to catch up with them. It was disgraceful, really, what Kemi Badenoch was saying as well yesterday. And I think there are some issues which should transcend party politics, and I think this is one of them.
And is ultimately Israel empowered to do this? Is a decision for them, one way or another, or not?
So countries are in control of their own borders, but I think parliamentarians, respected parliamentarians who are going on fact-finding missions, I understand that this visit was looking at potentially aid in the region. I think that seems like a very reasonable thing for a respected politicians such as Juan and Abtesam to be doing, and I was very, very sorry to see the way that they were treated.
Heidi Alexander, always a pleasure. Thanks for stopping by. Good to see you, the Transport Secretary, with us there. Now, the parents of a 14-year-old boy who carries a knife and put his mother into hospital have told Sky News that police repeatedly failed to take their concerns seriously. Thousands of families are desperate for protection from their own children, but the services that deal with the youth violence we're talking about are struggling to cope. Becky Johnson has more for us.
A teenage boy who became suddenly violent, his anger fuelled by online influencers. To viewers of the hit drama Adolescence, this may sound familiar. To this couple, it's their son.
Harry was wonderful.
He used to be really caring.
And then about 12 and a half, it all changed.
The trigger, they say, was when Harry was hit by a girl. He's now 14 and has become so violent he's been taken into care. We're using actors to protect their identities.
Harry became obsessed with being strong, and I think he developed a difficulty around certain female people because of the assault.
The whole alpha male type of behaviour.
He began attacking his mother, beating her so badly she ended up in hospital, and he's threatened to stab a teacher too.
My worst fear is that he's going to end up killing one of us. If not us, then somebody else. There's going to be somebody out there that's the wrong day, the wrong time, and he's going to end up killing them.
It's a shocking thought for any parent to have, but they're not alone. This organisation supports parents who've been victims of their own children's violence. 3,500 people contacted them last year, a 70% increase on the year before. Families desperate for help.
What we're hearing time and time again is that referrals are not being picked up because thresholds aren't being met, because perhaps the parent or caregiver isn't a risk to the child. So therefore, families are falling through gaps.
At this boxing gym, they take children referred by schools, social workers, even police.
Why should charities be picking up the pieces that somehow the system isn't dealing with?
It's so difficult because I think that the services that are currently tackling these issues are absolutely inundated. I think the biggest cause of the violent behaviour is mental health. We're seeing a massive correlation within that. Social media is having a huge impact, especially around that young person's identity.
By 14, Ethan had been arrested several times for getting into fights.
Someone could look at me, I'd be angry. Social media, yeah, that's definitely got a massive, massive part. I mean, my main thing was I see people with amazing bodies and stuff because they're working out, and I felt like I couldn't reach that point. It made me self-conscious, which would add on to the anger because I was angry at myself, which then turned into hatred towards other people. Just time and effort. That's all we need, and the understanding that it's a war in our heads.
A government spokesperson told us it's unacceptable that young people haven't been getting the care and treatment they need. Families believe the system isn't set up to deal with violent children. Becky Johnson, Sky News.
And we're going to be talking to the head of the Youth Endowment Fund at 7:45, so in 15 minutes' time, and Becky will join us for that. Right, let's have a look at the weather next.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, after a glorious weekend, it is looking mostly fine this week, albeit turning a bit more unsettled by this coming weekend. It will be a few changes as high pressure over the North Sea sinks south and it changes the wind direction. In terms of the next few hours, it's looking fine, if a bit chilly. A frosty start for many, but there'll be fog in places while the Northern Isles look rather grey. Any fog will soon lift, leaving almost unbroken sunshine, but the far north will stay quite cloudy and inland areas will become warm in the sunshine and it'll turn a little warmer near eastern coasts.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
So to come here on The Breakfast Show, Donald Trump's tariffs send shockwaves across the markets in Asia, but is a global recession on the way? We'll hear what economists think. Plus, we'll check in on the live markets view once again.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirm that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Lough Neagh. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast. It's starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Excuse me, coming up in just a moment, I'll be joined by the chief economist at KPMG, Yael Selfin. She's here with me in person. But first, a reminder of today's top stories. Markets falling sharply across Asia after a weekend that saw no backing down from tough tariff talk by the White House. The Hong Kong index is down, as we speak, nearly 13%, the biggest decline since 2008, as President Trump insisted tariffs are a necessary medicine.
I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something.
The Prime Minister will relax the rules around the UK's transition to zero-emission vehicles today after car makers were hit by Donald Trump's tariffs. The UK faces a 10% duty on exports to the US, with all cars imported facing a further 25%. Petrol and diesel car sales will end by 2030, but regulations will be changed to ease the transition. NHS staff are being harassed by members of the public, filming them with phones and threatening to post footage online. A survey by Unison found that 1 in 7 health workers have experienced unwanted and intrusive filming in the last year. Rubbish is piling high in Birmingham, and talks on a way forward will be held today between the Unite Union and Birmingham City Council. The council said picket lines blocking its depots are preventing waste vehicles from collecting rubbish, with some 17,000 tonnes of rubbish lining the streets. Right, let's check in again on the live picture of markets across Asia. 13%, the size of the decline, one-day decline for Hong Kong, albeit it was closed on Friday. 13% is certainly the biggest since October 2008, as we told you earlier, but that was when we were around 11%, so it might now be bigger still than some of the declines then. Japan down nearly 8%, Shanghai down 9%, Australia down 4%. Some astonishing single-day moves there in Asian markets. Just looking at the time, 2:20, 2:40 in Hong Kong. So we've got about an hour and 20 minutes left of trade there before those markets close. Currently down 13%. Of course, UK markets and European markets open in 25 minutes at 8 a.m. Let's discuss all of this with Yael Selfin, the Chief Economist at KPMG. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. So, I mean, these scale of declines are astonishing on a single day, but markets, of course, are volatile. But just that snapshot, the biggest decline in Hong Kong since October 2008. Are we looking at as big a global event for economies as 2008 was, or not?
Hopefully not. This is trade that we're talking about, so it's one element, but there's other elements of demand, for example, that should remain a little bit more resilient. So hopefully this is not the same thing, but it's really hard to tell. The key issue at the moment is confidence. If we've got confidence going down, that could trigger further decline in business investments and also in consumer spending. So that will accelerate the probability of recession.
Let's talk about the UK specifically. I mean, I guess there's obviously a number of reprieves to note. One is only 10%, whereas obviously US and China tariffs are much higher than that. But the other thing is that we're largely a services economy, and all of these tariffs are just on physical goods. Does that make a big difference for us?
It does. It makes a big difference. We are hit by the 25% tariff on cars, and car export are a significant component of our export to the US, so there's a little bit more there. But ultimately, the UK on its own is hit a little bit less. The problem is that some of our main trading partners are hit further. For example, the EU. So we'll be hit through a weaker market, potentially export markets for other markets, not just problems with the US economy.
One of the other big factors, of course, that tariffs typically lead to is inflation. As costs go up, obviously, for importers. That also has an effect on what might have been the solution to a slowing economy, which would be cutting interest rates. It's been the solution in 2008. It was the solution during COVID. Is that a big concern in terms of perhaps the secondary effects towards later part of this year?
Well, that makes things trickier in the US for the Fed, for example, because we are likely to see higher costs there through the higher tariffs. If we're not going to retaliate here in the UK, for example, ignoring the exchange rate and what will happen in the exchange rate, we shouldn't see that increase in import costs. If anything, we could see cheaper exports. We could see some countries divert their exports to us, so we could have cheaper champagne, for example, as a result of it. So that is why potentially...
It's one good offset.
Potentially, we could also see slightly faster cuts in interest rates here in the UK, which would be a big help.
That's really interesting. I hadn't sort of thought about that. Let's focus in on the US for a moment. I mean, talking about over the weekend, various investment banks changing their forecasts, saying, oh, we now alter our prediction for a recession in the US from 30% likelihood to 40% likelihood, or whatever it is that they're tweaking around the edges. Does that make sense to you? Is it only a fractional increase in the chance of a recession in the US? Or if these tariffs are maintained for weeks, for months, is it not a game-changing likelihood of a recession in the US?
So the US economy is very large, and it's fairly less open compared to, say, the UK. So export and imports don't make as much of a change on the outlook as it would be in a smaller economy. And then it also started from a relatively strong base. You still have relatively strong public finances, well, spending rather than finances. You're likely to see more tax cuts, potentially deregulation. So there's certain things that are likely to support stronger growth in the UK. Tariffs and all the things that they're doing with migration, for example, are likely to be negative. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think overall confidence is going to be lower, and also we could see higher rates in the US, but from there to get to a recession, there's still a little bit to go.
And what about China? I mean, obviously China, like the US, is a massive economy, but I guess unlike the US, is much more reliant on its trade position.
Yes, so it will depend a little bit on how it could divert export to other economies and whether it's going to try and boost domestic demand, so consumer spending inside the country, which would be actually quite favourable because they do need to switch a little bit from focus externally on external demand to consumer spending.
Just bring it back to the UK and your latest expectation. Obviously, a lot is changing day by day, but if the prior forecasts for this calendar year were only for about 1% growth, I don't know what your precise forecast was, is it a risk that that goes to zero or below in the year ahead now, or is it only likely to shave 0.1%, 0.2% off that growth?
So at the moment, we lowered our forecast from 1% to 0.8 for this year and to 0.8 next year. So it is a reduction, but it's still positive growth, and it's not a recession as such.
Yael Selfin, great to see you as always. Thanks so much for joining us. The chief economist at KPMG. Now, the family of a Venezuelan man deported from the US has told Sky News he was targeted by authorities because of his tattoos. Hundreds of Venezuelans have been accused of being gang members and sent to prison in El Salvador under Donald Trump's sweeping crackdown on immigration. Our US correspondent, Martha Kellner, has this report.
Until 5 weeks ago, Arturo Suarez was a professional singer performing in the US while seeking asylum from his native Venezuela. He followed the legal process to enter, but while recording a music video last month, he was arrested. It's believed he's one of over 200 men deported, not to their home country, but to this notorious El Salvador prison. It's part of President Trump's anti-immigration showpiece.
So you believe that Arturo is on this picture? You think he's this guy?
Yes.
That must be...
This is my bro.
That must be very sad to see.
Yeah.
Arturo's brother Nelson believes this is him, bound by his hands and feet, head shaved. The White House says Arturo is a gang member, but they've not provided any evidence to support this.
This is my brother. It's crazy. It's horrible.
Nelson says his brother's only crime is being Venezuelan and having tattoos.
Aproximadamente 33.
33 tattoos.
33 tattoos.
He liked tattoos.
No represent ganga Treinta.
It wasn't the gangs.
No.
A hummingbird tattoo in memory of his late mother, a piano and verses from the Bible. Nelson believes this is what landed his brother in prison.
Policía Nacional de Colombia.
He shows me letters from the authorities in Colombia, Chile and Venezuela, stating Arturo has no criminal record in any of the countries he's lived in. Nelson is in America also claiming asylum. He worries about being deported too, and for his brother's safety.
We don't know what conditions he is in, if he has been mistreated, if his rights are being violated.
The men deported on planes to El Salvador were seemingly denied due process. President Trump is defying the judiciary at every turn. Other families say their loved ones were targeted for their tattoos too. Herthe Reyes had a Real Madrid badge with rosary beads, the White House says a gang symbol. And this 31-year-old makeup artist had tattoos on his wrist reading Mum and Dad, both men now in the El Salvador mega prison. The Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, visited too.
Do not come to our country illegally.
Posing in front of inmates.
How did you feel seeing Kristi Noem doing a photo shoot in that prison, knowing that your brother is probably there?
I feel bad, horrible, because in those images we only see criminals. With my brother, I feel like it's more a political issue. They needed numbers. They said these are the numbers. And now let's throw them to the lions.
The Trump administration has now admitted it sent at least one man to the El Salvador prison by mistake, calling it an administrative error. Incredibly, the government also now says it lacks the power to order his return. I contacted the White House to ask about Arturo's case and the other men sent to this prison for ambiguous reasons and without any court hearing. They didn't respond. Nelson's questions about why his brother was taken from him and thrown in prison are still unanswered. Martha Kellner, Sky News.
Also to come here on The Breakfast Show, how to stop the alarming rise in youth violence. We'll be speaking with the chief of a charity that does just that.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power. No freedom! Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film. But it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Welcome back. Time to talk more about Becky Johnson's extraordinary report into rising youth violence. We're joined now by the Chief Executive of the Youth Endowment Fund, John Yates. Becky's here as well. Becky, just remind us, set up the story again for us that we've been discussing all morning, given your report.
Of course, the hit drama Adolescence has got us all, including the Prime Minister, talking about the issue of youth violence. But I've been speaking to families and indeed teenagers in communities for whom these issues have been very live and very pertinent for actually quite some time. So issues of violence, issues of online content, changing the views of young people so that they become more extreme, so that they become more violent. And really, parents at a loss. I mean, some parents I spoke to in my report said that they are afraid that their 14-year-old son might kill them or somebody else. And they've tried warning the authorities about this, but they say there's just a lack of services to help people who are in their position.
As we said, John is the CEO of the Youth Endowment Fund. John, I mean, Becky's package is quite extraordinary. It's a sort of real version of the drama. Did you find it striking, or are these stories you're kind of quite well aware of already?
I think if you don't find the story shocking, you've sort of lost something. You know, this is familiar territory to me, but it makes you just so sad and tragic to see what's happening. And we do have a really serious problem. So we know every year 50 children die because they lose their life in some sort of youth violence. 500 children end up in hospital. 50% of all of our teenagers say that they've changed their behaviour because they're afraid that it might happen to them. So the fear, to some extent, is almost as bad, if not worse, than the event. I would always remind us, violence is more often committed by adults than by... It's right that we worry more about children. It's got to be right. But we mustn't demonise young people. But we do have a serious problem, and I think what your piece got to is, where's the help? You know, who do you actually turn to if this is happening to you?
Just quickly on that point, though, John, I mean, what is the scale of this issue? Because I guess the amount we're all talking about it, which is always only a good thing from the drama, might imply it's a sort of epidemic for British young boys.
Yeah, I think epidemic isn't the right description for what's going on. You know, we've lived through an epidemic and a pandemic recently. We sort of know that means really, really common and everywhere. I think if we're talking about children seeing violence online, seeing it, I think that is an epidemic. We know 70% of teenagers have seen violent content online in the last year. And a lot of them, most of them, were not looking for it. So I think if we're talking about that, that's an epidemic. The actual committing of serious violence remains really rare, but the fear of it is very high. So we've got to somehow hold in our heads that there's some sort of swamp online that's affecting our children. The actual cases of serious violence remain rare, but the fear of it is very broad. So I think we should take it seriously, but I don't think panicking is the right response.
John, you just raised the question about where is the help, particularly for parents who are trying to raise the alert about their own children. You run a charity. I spoke to a boxing gym that gets referrals from the police and from social workers. Why is it that charities are having to deal with this issue? Where are the public services that should be there?
Yeah, so the fundamental problem we've got is if you're the mother or the father in your report, if it were me, what are you going to do? You want to call for help. And you should be going to something called Children's Services, which is something every council, wherever you live, there's a Children's Services department. You should be able to call them and get help. You're more than likely going to be told, we can't help you. The language used would be, you don't meet the threshold. In other words, your problem is not serious enough to get help. Now, that, to me, is madness. And I think to most people working in children's services, who are social workers, that is madness. Now, why is that happening? Two reasons. One, money. You know, the economy's not growing, we don't have that much cash. We as a country need to decide, do we listen to your story and say, it's not good enough? Well, if it's not good enough, we've got to put more money in. And there is some more money going into children's services, but the second problem is it going to help teenagers? So often, children's services is there for protecting small babies, small children from adults doing terrible things. We've got to wake up a bit and realise, actually, it's got to be much more there for teenagers, where often they are either a threat to others or the damage isn't coming from their parents, it's coming from other teenagers. We're not great at that, and we've got to change the process.
What is your advice, John, to parents in the meantime, particularly those that just want to preempt getting anywhere near this sort of issue?
Yeah, so look, why do most children ever turn to violence? It's because they feel they don't matter, they don't have a sort of meaning, a sense of purpose in the world. Violence is a terrible thing to get involved in, but you do it because you want someone to pay attention to you, to listen to you. So what most parents do brilliantly is, obviously we find our children infuriating, but we show them that they matter by being there for them, spending time with them, and it's hard because we're busy, but it's so important. If you're really struggling, I'd really recommend you talk to the school. Be honest and frank with the school. Tell them what you're going through. Say that your child needs some support. I will always be arguing that schools need some more funding to support those children. But talk to the school. Ask for mentoring support. I think my child needs a mentor. You talk about boxing. It's the mentors that can really matter. And if you happen to be someone working in a school or working in children's services, I'd really implore you to go online. You can Google search something called the Youth Endowment Fund, YEF, Toolkit. It just tells you what works and what doesn't. Because a lot of the stuff we give children and parents, if they get any support, isn't the best stuff. What they need is long-term mentoring and sometimes access to therapy and real support to deal with some of their problems.
Very quick final thought, Becky.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, really summing up what you're saying, there isn't really a particular body that is dealing with this issue. Child protection in Britain is set up to protect children, not to protect people from children. And with this growing phenomenon of violent children, it is really difficult for people to know exactly who to turn to.
Really fascinating discussion, John, Becky, as always. Thank you. Quick look at the weather.
The perfect climate, wherever the destination. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's looking mostly fine this week, turning a bit more unsettled, though, by the weekend. There will be a few changes as high pressure over the North Sea sinks south, changing the wind direction. Most places will be fine if chilly over the next few hours after a frosty start for many, but there'll be fog in places while the Northern Isles look rather grey. Any fog will soon lift, leaving almost unbroken sunshine, but the far north will stay quite cloudy. Inland areas will become warm in the sunshine, and it'll turn a little warmer near many eastern coasts, and it'll be less windy than it was yesterday. The afternoon will bring little change, staying sunny into the evening. That's your weather.
The perfect climate, whatever the forecast. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock. Markets here and in Europe are just opening. Heavy selling across Asia will be live to a UK trading floor momentarily.
The government says President Trump's tariffs are bad news for the British economy as it hits global demand. We'll speak to the Conservatives this hour.
It is Monday, April the 7th. Your headlines. British and European markets open amid fears of a global trade war after Asia sees some of the worst trading since the late 90s.
I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something.
After British car makers were hit by those tariffs, the Prime Minister relaxes the rules on the transition to zero-emission vehicles.
My worst fear is that he's going to end up killing one of us. If not us, then somebody else.
After the hit show Adolescence, we hear the real-life nightmare scenario for any parent dealing with an increasingly violent child. A very good morning to you. Markets are opening as we speak in London and across Europe. They are suffering in a similar way to Asian trade, which was sharply lower on Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index. The market declining by some 13%. It makes it the worst day since the Asian financial crisis in 1997. Worse still than October 2008, which we were referencing earlier when it crossed a 13% threshold. We're currently down 12% in Hong Kong. Extraordinary for a one-day move. I think it's an hour left of trade there. We've got Japan down 7.8%, Shanghai down 7.9%, and Australia down 4%. The FTSE 100 has opened down to the tune of about 2%. Let's go out to our business presenter, Darren McCaffrey. He's at the Peel Hunt trading floor in central London for us. Darren, what's it like there?
Yeah, very good morning to you, Wilf. As you say, shares down again this morning. The FTSE down, more than 2%. The FTSE 250 down over 2.5% as well. It marks actually what the biggest one-day sell-off we'd seen on the FTSE 100 last Friday. And as you say, as a reflection of some of the losses that we've seen in Asia too. Big sell-offs there. Asia particularly exposed to these US tariffs. Banking and car manufacturers really hard hits. Let's bring in Callum Pickering. He's chief economist here at Peel Hunt. Callum, very good morning, to you, but it is not a good morning yet again. We're seeing essentially the FTSE and other stock markets hit around the world.
That's right. Markets are trying to understand what is potentially one of the most historic and arbitrary shocks to global trade in history. So the outlook is highly uncertain. This is bad for confidence, it's bad for investment plans, it's bad for production and global trade. And it makes it very difficult for central banks because who knows what happens next if America puts these tariffs up, if other countries react by putting their tariffs up. The initial thing that we'll see in prices is prices will go up, but if confidence is down, do central banks cut interest rates? Do they keep rates where they are? So there's lots of moving parts.
And what about us here in the UK? As I say, the FTSE has taken a bit of battering over recent days. There is no doubt about that, though tariffs aren't as high in the UK as they are elsewhere. In terms of the wider economy, what impact is this likely to have?
Well, the economy.
Are we talking about recession territory here?
I don't think we're talking about a recession in the UK. Growth will be slower. We've revised down our numbers a little, although I would say there are so many moving parts. The direction is important. We're probably looking at around 1% growth this year. I think the central Bank of England, will be able to go a little bit faster. Probably 3 cuts. I think 2 was the most likely outcome last week. What we need to keep in mind is, does the US intend to keep these tariffs on permanently to generate revenue, or does the US actually intend to bring other countries to the negotiating table, in which case these tariffs will come down? That ultimately sets the direction of markets. If the tariffs are here to stay, directionally, these markets make sense. If the tariffs are going to be taken off at some point, then we might actually see some recovery.
OK, Callum, for the time being, thank you very much indeed. An historic act of self-harm is what this chief economist thinks about these tariffs for the United States. Impact a bit less blunted here, but clearly it is hammering stock markets again this morning. Particular industries are very, very exposed to that, and we'll keep across these numbers, Wilf, throughout the morning here on Sky.
Darren, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. Just to bring people up to speed again, the FTSE 100 is down 3% at the open, 4 minutes into trade. Of course, not as pronounced as that 12% or so decline we're seeing in Hong Kong, but it is additive to sharp declines that we saw on the FTSE 100 on Thursday and on Friday. And it sets the tone at the start of a new week that despite the weekend, despite the break in trade that we had, the sentiment remains, and it is a sharply negative one. Just to give you a snapshot as well, futures in the US have worsened over the last couple of hours. The S&P 500 is currently expected to open down by 5% come the open at 2:30 p.m. UK time. So again, massively negative sentiment across equity markets globally once again. Well, in response, the Prime Minister has made moves to mitigate the impact of Donald Trump's tariffs by relaxing the rules around the transition to EVs by 2030. A little earlier, I asked the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, about those plans and whether or not a recession can be avoided.
So the imposition of global tariffs and the reciprocal tariffs that some countries have and retaliatory tariffs that some countries have decided to apply are bad news for the global economy because it's bad for global demand, it's bad for prices and it's bad for consumers. And so that is why we have to do everything that we can to protect the interests of the British people and British businesses.
Heidi Alexander on the show a little bit earlier. And Mari, I mean, the gist of the sort of first half of that interview is look at the scale of what's going on. Yeah. Massive global declines. You're coming out to say we're responding, but it's quite a lot of detailed, minor detail, tweaking this change and that to help a transition to EVs. Yeah. It's certainly not a massive change in government policy.
No, it's not. And critics might argue that actually, you know, for something so drastic as these tariffs, you need a bit of a drastic response. However, the government is maintaining that actually a softly, calm, cool and collected approach is still needed. Even now that we do know what tariffs we are being hit by, they still believe that actually that is the way we should be behaving and that is the way they want to conduct business, especially with the US. The Prime Minister's on a visit today, all about trying to, you know, boost the British economy. And we're going to be hearing from him, you know, early afternoon, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of language and tone he uses around this. But what Heidi Alexander at the end of that clip was talking about was, as you say, these tinkerings around electric vehicles. And their argument is that this is giving certainty and stability to car manufacturing businesses here in the UK in this kind of era of turmoil and difficulty. The difficulty is the rhetoric is kind of slightly not necessarily chiming with the message that they are trying to get across. We understand the Prime Minister says he's in favour of free and open trade, so this idea that, you know, globalisation is dead in the water, as it were, they feel is actually slightly too strong of a characterisation of some of the Minister's comments. But nonetheless, they also telling us, you know, government sources telling us, don't expect a quick deal with the US. This is going to be a bit of a slow process.
I just want to bring up the market chart again for the FTSE 100. We're now obviously 8 minutes into trade and we're down 5.5%. So we opened lower, 2.5%, and we've steadily worsened throughout the first 10 minutes or so of trade. And Mari, this follows what was already very sharp declines on Thursday and Friday. One wondered whether over the weekend there'd be a calmness either to the rhetoric from the President, Donald Trump, which there wasn't, or to the mindset of investors and traders. And clearly that calmness is absent. We are down 5.5% on the FTSE 100. It's worth showing you again the final hour of Asian trade. Hong Kong, another hour left of trade, or just under an hour, and it's down 12.5%, if we've got it for you again now, just shy of 12%. Japan down 7.8%, Shanghai down 7.3%, and Australia down 4%. The FTSE is again down some 4.5% or so percent, if we can show that to you with markets pricing around the rest of Europe. And, you know, it's worth pausing, Mari, on this to say this doesn't necessarily mean that the GDP growth and the economy will decline this much. Of course it doesn't at all. But it is an indicator of how worried investors and markets are by what is going on. And of course, the rhetoric, we had Yael Selfin, who's a much better place than I and you to discuss forecast for growth, saying it's only going to hit the UK growth by a couple of basis points here and there. The markets aren't saying that, though, at the moment. They're a bit more worried. It is worth just adding, though, that when a threshold is crossed and sentiment shifts, markets can kind of fall out of bed a little bit, and you can get overreactions as well. Liquidity can dry up, and only sell orders are in place, and you can't find that point where markets settled. And there's definitely a bit of that going on as well. It will be interesting to see if the FTSE 100 is still down live 5-6% when the Prime Minister's talking about this policy today, early afternoon.
Yeah.
I can't imagine he won't just have questions thrown at him left, right and centre.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
Yes.
What have you done today? You've changed the mandate for no more petrol and diesel cars still at 2030, and you've kicked the can for EV cars to 2035. I mean, that does nothing to car markets. We'll see what he has to say.
Yeah, and I think also it's important to remember, Keir Starmer writing in the Times this morning, he's saying, criticising previous political leaders for sticking their head in the sand, and he's saying, I'm going to, confront these issues head on and be a proactive, active Prime Minister, protecting industry as and where I can. But the more that the UK economy is buffeted by these international decisions, that really Keir Starmer has very little influence over, the more difficult his job becomes, because he will always be blamed for anything that happens in the economy, even if a lot of it may be out of his control. And that's politics, right?
I've covered markets pretty closely for some time. I haven't seen many days like this. I mean, it reminds you of peak days of fear during the COVID pandemic. And, to see the FTSE 100 slide to a 6% decline in 11 minutes is pretty pronounced. I mean, just to bring you some individual stock move, Barclays is down 8% as we speak. Deutsche Bank in Europe is down 8.8%. It's just worth noting it's not just the exporters that are being hit very hard. We saw that in Japan in trade earlier on today, that Nintendo was down sharply, Toyota was down sharply. You'd expect that because they export a lot to the US. But the Japanese banks were down double digits, MUFG down 15%. And this is where people start to get worried that even if we only have a 10% tariff here, even if it's only going to hit GDP, all else equal, you start to get a risk of contagion in financial markets. You start to wonder whether unintended consequences materialise. And for that, people always look at the financial sector because it's so intertwined, it's so instant. And the banks are down pretty sharply at the moment, which won't be something that anybody really wants to see. Let's have a look at some of the banks across the rest of Europe as well. As I said, Deutsche Bank is down some 9%. Barclays is in the eye of the storm, down 8%. Let's bring up again that graphic just to see what the FTSE 100 is doing as we speak. Down 6% last time we looked. It looks like it's sort of settling at that level. But again, 12 minutes into trade. The German market is down some 7% as we speak, so down a little bit more pronounced. You might expect that because Germany is such an export-dependent economy. But the point here really is that markets are in free fall. It started on Thursday in trade here. It's continued through Friday and here on Monday morning. The weekend has not acted as a break as some might have hoped. Let's just recap you on the European trade, the Asian trade, as well, because there's still an hour left to trade, or just shy of an hour for markets like Hong Kong. Down over 13% at one moment in Hong Kong, now down 12%. The Nikkei down 7.8%. Shanghai, 7% declines, and Australia down 4%. We're going to be back out with Darren McCaffrey on the trading floor at Peel Hunt at about past. Let's just give you one more snapshot of the FTSE 100 before we move on to the day's other news, as European stocks broadly down some 6% at the open. The FTSE 100 itself down 5.7%. The Pan-European Stocks 600 index is down 6%. The German DAX, by the way, was down some 9% in the pre-market, so some people expected it to open as much as that down. It's currently down about 7%. And of course, just to remind you, this comes after significant selling late last week. We'll be back with an update on the markets, before past. We'll keep an eye on it for you throughout the morning. But let's bring you now some of the day's other news. 2 people have been killed and 6 others were injured after an Israeli airstrike hit a tent in southern Gaza. The tent was being used as a base by journalists outside the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis. Local health officials say that more than 30 people were killed in separate Israeli strikes on Sunday. The son of an elderly British couple being held in a high-security prison in Afghanistan has told Sky News his parents have never heard one accusation or charge. Barbie and Peter Reynolds have lived in the country for the last 18 years. They were detained by the Taliban's Interior Ministry in February. Their son Jonathan says he's extremely worried for their welfare.
They are under a deep conviction from back in the sort of late 60s when they married in Afghanistan in 1970, that they were going to give their life for the future, a bright future for Afghanistan. So when the Taliban came in by force, the British government and the embassy there said, hey, you've got about a 20 or a 40-minute window, we can get you out. To which my parents responded, why would we leave these people in their darkest hour?
2 people have been arrested after a man was shot dead in County Durham. Emergency services were called to an address in Stanley on Saturday night following reports of a disturbance. A 6-year-old man was pronounced dead at the scene. Police say a man and a woman have been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. Talks start this afternoon between Birmingham City Council and Unite over the ongoing bin strike in the city. Refuse workers have been taking strike action since the 11th of March in a dispute over pay. The council have previously declared a major incident as 17,000 tonnes of rubbish line the street. NHS staff are being harassed by members of the public, filming them with phones and threatening to post footage online. A survey by Unison found that 1 in 7 health workers have experienced unwanted and intrusive filming in the last year. Sadia's here to tell us more about exactly what we're talking about here, Sadia.
So this is patients and sometimes their families who take out their mobile phone and start recording things without the consent of the NHS workers. So I'm sure this happens in a lot of industries, but this is a survey looking at healthcare workers across the UK who say that patients will often get their phones out. If it's in an emergency department, there's an altercation that is being filmed. In a drive-by situation, when there's been a road accident, paramedics say that people are filming people who have been knocked down by cars or in other emergency situations. And even their number plates are being recorded, according to this survey. The NHS workers say it's not just on phones, but people are using webcams, sometimes hidden recorded devices, and it's happening across hospital sites, but also at homes and during online consultations. This footage is then, they say, being put onto social media, putting pressure. This is what they say is a workplace harassment. Sometimes that footage is live streamed and sometimes it's used to threaten staff. So this is what the survey says is being done by the workers' union Unison, saying incidents are leaving staff feeling intimidated and fearful. And when they asked in this survey staff who have experienced any form of intimidation from patients or families filming them in the past year, 14% said yes. I have to say 79% said no, and many stop filming when they're asked to. But it appears that many people don't understand that you can't film someone without their consent and that they are continuing to do this in medical situations.
Sadia, thanks so much. Let's have a look at the markets again for you before we speak to the Conservatives. A little bit of a reprieve. That's out of date for you. The FTSE 100 is in fact down 2.8% now, so having fallen more immediately at the open, it has bounced a little bit. Currently, the FTSE 100 is down 3%. The broader Stocks 600 across continental Europe is down 3.2%. France down 2.4%. Italy down 1.4%. Those are the Asian markets for you. As you can see, sharply lower across the board with a little bit of time left in trade in Hong Kong, down 12.5%. Asian markets, obviously, sharply lower, significantly lower here in Europe as well. The FTSE 100 down 3%. Gosh, the DAX in Germany, if there's been some reprieve for the FTSE 100, which was down 5% at one point, now only down 3%. But the DAX in Germany is down 9% as we speak, of course, a very export-heavy economy. Let's talk to the opposition. Joined now by Richard Holden, the Conservative Shadow Paymaster General. There we go. Looking for your current qualification. Great to have you with us. Thanks. Great to be on. What's your reaction to the scale of response we're seeing in financial markets? It was sharp selling Thursday, Friday. It's continuing today. Does it worry you?
Look, I don't think tariffs help anyone. I think there's we need to have that competitive advantage. That's how the global economy works. There are obviously certain situations where countries have been maybe dumping goods that you want to see that, and there's been unfairness. Tariffs have been higher on one side than the other. But no, I think I want to see a situation where we see tariffs come off, and especially in a UK context where I think a lot of businesses, small businesses, particularly in my constituency, already feeling that they're being hammered by these new national insurance tax rises, and now seeing some of these tariffs as well. It is creating concern and uncertainty as well.
Certainly. The German index is down 10% now. Do you think we're headed for a global recession?
I hope not. I hope not. And whatever we do in the UK, whatever the UK government's response is, really needs to recognise that this is a concerning time for business. So they shouldn't be putting extra massive regulations on business like we're seeing at the moment with the 300 pages of extra regulations on employment going through, which I really worry is going to harm jobs in the UK, or that national insurance tax rise, which is only kicking in yesterday. Some businesses have already been shedding jobs in advance. I really worry about the impact on the wider economy and now, and also even budgets in the public sector as well. We've seen that local government have been compensated to a small degree for some of the extra costs they're bearing directly, but so many of their suppliers, particularly things like social care, they haven't been compensated for those. So it's going to be the rest of the public sector which gets squeezed in that area, and that's going to be things like millions of potholes not being filled. Or I spoke to a head teacher literally last week saying, yes, he had been compensated for his teaching staff, but not for the support staff. So he's going to have to possibly make redundancies of the support staff in his school because the government has put the national insurance on but not compensated them for all of it.
The government today is announcing that they're relaxing the regulations that your government put into place about the transition to electric vehicles. Is that something that's a sensible thing to do at this time?
Well, I mean, the first thing they did when they came into office was actually change. We'd moved. Rishi's government had moved the start date back of this to 2035, and then they moved. And the Labour government came in with Ed Miliband and Keir move it forward to 2030. Now they're saying they're going to move it back to 2035, which is the situation when they came into government, but they might change.
It at 2030.
But they might change some of the transition. Well, we don't know exactly what they're going to do. But my understanding is they're going to move it back to 2035, which is what it was when they came into office. But that some of the steps between 2030 and 2035 might also be changed as well. We'll just have to see what they actually announce. But I mean, the car industry is being hit by £200 million a year just for the car sector of extra national insurance costs. There are real concerns in the commercial van sector around the future of the plug-in van grant, absolutely essential for big manufacturers like Ford. Transit in the UK is their absolute flagship product. We do not know what's going to happen there. They're one of the biggest employers in my constituency with their Dunton campus there, the UK headquarters. So I'm very, very worried about the future of this sector, particularly as well when we're seeing actually things like the twin cab tax coming in. That's on a lot of commercial vehicles suddenly being taxed as if they're cars. That's thousands of pounds extra a year for small businesses in my constituency.
It's not a typically Tory thing to do, but at a moment like this, industries, we could talk about the steel industry, for example, perhaps is even more pronounced example of the pressure being felt because of artificial forces from Donald Trump. Should nationalisation be considered where necessary?
Look, I mean, I think there needs to be very, very carefully thought through. We did see an example in the early 70s when that happened with Rolls-Royce under a Conservative government because of certain international factors. And when there is, major strategic sectors which have a defence element to them, I think there's a possibility of consideration of that. I wouldn't like to prejudge anything at the moment, and I think the government needs to do a lot more. And I think the thing it really needs to do is actually move a lot more on some of these environmental taxes. Kemi made a really good speech a few weeks ago, really setting the direction of travel for the Conservatives around that agenda. Of course, we want to be sensible with a sustainable environmental policy, but that cannot be the expense of jobs in the UK when all we're doing is offshoring them to other countries. I think that's been a really sensible move under the new leadership the Conservatives had, and I hope we can go further in that direction in the future.
Richard Holden, thanks for joining us. Good to see you. Let's have a look at the markets again, because the selling has continued, and we mentioned a brief reprieve for the FTSE 100. It opened down 2%. It got down to about 5% declines, and then recovered to only 3% declines. Again, that graphic's not live, but it says down 5.6% as we speak. The German index is down 8%. France down 6.3%. The broad Stocks 600 Europe is down 5.9%. There are the live pitch prices for you, as you can see, across Europe. Sharp declines and continuing the mood of Asian trade, which saw the Hong Kong index at one point down 13%, making it the worst individual trading day in Hong Kong since the Asia crisis of 1997, worse than its worst trading days in the financial crisis or in COVID. It's down 12.5% as we speak. Should mention what US futures are expected to do at the moment. We're pointing towards about a 5% decline at the open for the S&P 500. A reminder, the FTSE 100 is down 5.8% as we speak. We're going to have a quick look at the weather now.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's looking mostly fine this week, likely turning more unsettled next weekend. Expect a few changes, however, as high pressure over the North Sea sinks south, changing the wind direction. Most places will be fine, if chilly over the next few hours. After a frosty start for many, but there'll be fog in places, while the Northern Isles look rather grey. Any fog will soon lift, leaving almost unbroken sunshine, but the far north will stay quite cloudy. Inland areas will become warm in the sunshine, and it'll turn a little warmer near many eastern coasts. It'll be less windy than yesterday.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, we'll get the very latest from all things politics, including the Prime Minister's plans for the car industry. Sam and Anne will be with us. And the Venezuelan man deported from the US to this prison in El Salvador to tell us why they think...
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirm that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Lough Neagh. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. We're coming up a huge week ahead in politics as the government looks to get to grips with the tariffs coming out of the United States. Sam and Anne will be here to make sense of it all. But first, a reminder of our top stories this morning. The FTSE 100 is falling sharply, down over 5% 30 minutes into trade. European markets also down sharply, with the German index down over 7% following heavy selling in Asia that saw the worst day for the Hong Kong market since the Asia crisis in 1997, a 12% decline there.
I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something.
The Prime Minister will relax the rules around the UK's transition to zero-emission vehicles today after car makers were hit by Donald Trump's tariffs. The UK faces a 10% duty on exports to the US, with all cars imported to the US facing a further 25% levy. Petrol and diesel car sales will end by 2030, but regulations will be changed to ease the transition. NHS staff are being harassed by members of the public, filming them with phones and threatening to post footage online. A survey by Unison found that 1 in 7 health workers have experienced unwanted and intrusive filming in the last year. Rubbish is piling high in Birmingham and talks are happening in terms of a way forward between the Unite Union and Birmingham City Council today. The council said picket lines blocking its depots are preventing waste vehicles from collecting rubbish, with 17,000 tonnes lining the streets. Let's have another look at how markets are faring before we bring in Sam and Anne. We're going to go out to our business presenter, Darren McCaffrey. He's on a trading floor in central London. The FTSE currently down 5%, the German DAX down 7%, French CAC down 6%, Italy down 6%. Darren, what's the mood there?
Not good is the honest answer. I mean, it is a bit of a bloodbath again this morning. You have to remember the FTSE had its biggest one-day fall since COVID on Friday. We are seeing essentially that again this morning. At one stage in the last 30 minutes, every single company in the FTSE 100 was in the red. Rolls-Royce at one stage down some 13%. It is miners, banks, investment firms that are the big fallers today, and we've seen that elsewhere around the world, particularly, as you say, in Asia, that is largely exposed to these US tariffs. It is HSBC, Standard Chartered, the banks that deal with global commerce, if you like, that have been hard hit, alongside car manufacturers as well. And as you say, it has not been a good 30 minutes in Europe as well, with large numbers of those companies seeing falls. Again, particularly companies like car manufacturers hitting the German stock market pretty hard. And I think this is all in part, of course, because of lots of uncertainty, Wilf. Investors here in London and elsewhere simply do not know and cannot work out at this moment in time whether these tariffs are being used by President Trump as a negotiating tactic to try and get better deals for the United States, or if they're permanent. And if they're permanent, the drag that could have on global trade and on the US economy, the world's largest economy. They're also concerned by the fact that China announced those retaliatory tariffs on Friday, a sign that the world's second largest economy is up for a fight when it comes to trade. So, yes, it is not good, fundamentally, for the stock market this morning, but that will feed at some point into the wider economy, with all estimations saying that the likelihood of a recession in the United States has gone up yet again today. And, of course, that will have a big impact here in the UK. Talking to Chief Economist here, though, he's suggesting the UK will not go into recession, he thinks, because of these tariffs, but it will be a drag on the UK's economy.
Darren, great stuff. Darren McCaffrey there, live in the City of London for us. Let's discuss what this all means for the government. Joining us, Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates and Executive Editor and Head of Audio at Politico, Anne McElvoy. Very good morning to you both, and particularly great to have you here with us in person. I've had to endure just far too often.
I came to help out.
Thank you very much. Of late, no, fantastic to have you both with us. Sam, you know, we are talking about monstrous declines in stock markets. We were saying how the move in the Hong Kong market is the worst individual day move since the Asian financial crisis in 1997, 7% down on the German index, another 5% on the FTSE 100. The government announcement today is sort of tweaking around the edges of this transition on one particular subsector of a big manufacturing area. I mean, almost like you should have just come out and said, let's make a speech about how we're here for business, but not announce individual policies until it's a big bazooka to help what's going on.
Well, he's going to try a little bit of both. Look, viewers will be seeing stock market declines. Now, over the last 4 days since Donald Trump made his announcement on tariffs, people have been trying to work out the impact. And actually, it's really interesting this morning, KPMG, the accountancy firm, have put some actual numbers on it from a UK perspective. So growth this year, down from 1.7% to 0.8%, basically halved. Next year, 1.4 to 0.8%. That's big declines on Rachel Reeves.
Just to clarify, because we had Yael Selfin on, they'd already lowered it to 1%. So it's 1% to 0.8 for this year.
For this year. But still, a big decline, a big hit to the public finances, which does, as you say, need the government to think big. And yet, the kind of rhetorical response and the policy response, well, on the big picture political argument that they're doing, Keir Starmer is going to say, not that globalisation has failed. There was a bit of that over the weekend. That's not where Downing Street tell me that they are. They're going to make the argument that it's been failing some communities, but Keir Starmer does believe in free trade, and they're going to try and strengthen free trade with countries. And there are going to be more calls with leaders over the next few days. And yes, then there is this quite small announcement. I mean, it's very big in terms of net zero, and it's very big in terms of the automotive sector. But overall, it's not the kind of big bazooka that you can get at moments like this, which waters down green rules in order to give car manufacturers a little bit more scope, a little bit more flexibility in the transition from petrol and diesel cars to electric vehicles. Is that the kind of big response that we want? Well, they would argue we're hearing about cars today. We will hear about steel. And we will hear about pharma company help. That's Rachel Reeves' 3 priorities over the next few days. But in terms of supercharging the economy, there isn't anything big. I would just ask Wilf what they could do, given they're committed to their fiscal rules, don't really want to tax very much more, can't cut spending a great deal, and they have just done all of that and doubled down on their positions on all that. So I'm not sure what a big bazooka would look like.
No, it's certainly tricky to come up with the big policy, and that takes time. It's a question of whether the focus on a small policy in the meantime is enough, as it were. And just to go back to what Sam touched on there, over the weekend, this rhetoric of globalisation has failed, almost to suggest, which, Sam is almost saying that this isn't their message, but almost to suggest that tariffs have been imposed, so let's move away from free trade. Because there's also an opportunity here for the UK, isn't there? To say, look, we are a nation that you can trust. We are a nation that's pro-business. And it'll be interesting to see the extent to which that message is embraced in the weeks and months ahead.
Well, that is really the message that they're wanting to put out there in the negotiations about an American trade deal. The problem with relying on that too much, and possibly that has been the case in the last couple of weeks, is when this tariff onslaught hit as hard as it did, waiting to see what kind of deal you might get, which may alleviate matters, but is unlikely to be a game changer in terms of addressing all of those impacts that Sam was just talking about there. And I know you follow financial markets very closely. You're seeing the damage that is happening there, and what happens in Asia then reverberates here. It affects the City of London a lot. What's going to happen there? Will the government, to add to the list of things it's supposed to be trying to shore up, what about jobs in the City of London? So I think the danger of the position that they're in, to be honest, is that it looks like Keir Starmer is always alleviating. He's always a bit of this, a bit of that. I think you suggested a bit that yourself, that yes, there's going to be that longer road, if you like, to the transition to electric vehicles, and maybe that is good in terms of certainly those affected will say, well, that's better than trying to ram it through against this backdrop. But what you get is a danger of incoherence, where you just say, well, today we're doing this sector, tomorrow we're doing that sector. Sam believes this is building up to a picture which is as much as Keir Starmer can do without breaking his fiscal rules or making big changes. The question is, ultimately, is the bazooka is going to have to be bigger at some point. So how do you prepare the road to that? And the words, of course, they don't want to have badly around this week at all is, are we headed towards some form of bigger tax burden, tax rises, in order to cope with this situation?
Well, I guess, Sam, that one option would be to start talking about changing the fiscal rules, and we've discussed this before. Heidi Alexander again said this morning they're not going to do that. The other option would be a more bazooka-type approach to this net zero commitment, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. The thing that automakers and business would welcome in light of this changing world is scrapping this arbitrary date by which no more petrol cars could be sold. That's not what they're doing, for example. Or it would be to try and lower energy prices in a different way. That's all I'm kind of getting at. And I guess what they're saying is we're still committed to these broad net zero preferences over responding to what could be a big threat to growth.
I just push back on one argument, the idea that watering down all green targets is automatically pro-business. One of the reasons that you had a hard deadline, 2030, the point at which only electric cars could be sold new, not diesel, not petrol, was to spur investment in things like those roadside chargers, investment just generally in the infrastructure you need to move to electric cars. And if the number of electric vehicles isn't going to be as high as was previously thought, which now seems likely under the government's latest plan, then are the companies that were going to invest going to get the returns that they were promised? That kind of slip sliding, that lack of certainty is something that business traditionally doesn't like. And that, in big picture, is what you're going to see if you water down the entire net zero agenda. At the moment, there is a lot of investment going into things like carbon capture and storage, into nuclear. But if you can just slip slide backwards and rely more on fossil fuels, if you can water down commitments, then actually those industries are going to suffer. So I think it's not as simple as business thinks net zero is bad. A lot of money is going into these industries. It's one of Britain's big growth areas.
I think it depends, obviously, which part of business you're in.
Of course.
But I also think the key point on this really is whether it will have to be abandoned at some point or not. And, there are, for example, from the government's own press release, 75,000 public charge points only in this country. Are we really going to be ready for no petrol cars?
This is where I'm pointing out that I can almost predict that there will be another Keir Starmer or someone will get the moment to just push targets out that little bit more and fix and fiddle. And maybe this is a difficult transition. One has to have some understanding for that. I think there's also, I wouldn't say it's clearly it's a deal-breaking tension, but there is a tension then also between doing those big deals with China, where what we're really going to see is Chinese EVs coming into the market tariff-free at scale. I mean, everything my learned friend says is, as always, correct when it comes to how the government sees the incentives. But at the same time, they're very determined, particularly in this environment, to do that deal with China, to be out there on the front foot with China. And who is the beneficiary of that? Well, you could say the motorist getting an offer of cheap Chinese EVs, but ultimately you'll be hanging out the bunting in Beijing rather than Birmingham.
And writ large, this argument applies to a lot of areas of government. So from the centre, from Downing Street, we're hearing, we're going to look at regulators, we're going to get rid of regulators, we're going to remove red tape. Right, last week, Wilf, I was sitting here with you after a big review into red tape and regulators that's lasted 7 months that concluded all the regulators were the right one and most of the regulations were the right one. So Downing Street says all this stuff, but it doesn't do it. Now, is that Starmerism or is that going to change?
The other thing, just to come back to all of this, of what this does politically, I mean, we could argue about KPMG lowering growth in the UK from 1 to 0.8. We could argue about Goldman Sachs saying the likelihood of a US recession has risen from 30% to I think it was 50%. I mean, the financial markets are not saying that. They're saying recession risks have soared in recent days and weeks. If that does materialise now, Sam, does it hit the government, or is this so clearly something that was triggered by President Trump that they escape as much heat as they would have otherwise got?
Well, I think it's hard to be certain. That feels likely, but that's frankly a piece of futurology that I can't quite work out. You do have examples from 2008, 9, 10, where I think Gordon Brown, in the run-up to that 2010 election, quite successfully made the argument about a global recession. That took the edge off the Tories' ability to attack him. But traditionally, elections do see moments where electorates punish governments if their financial position isn't improving. I think there's a difficult balance to strike. Where I think it's dangerous for the government, and I heard a Labour MP assert this last night, is when they just blindly say things like, people are getting better off. Well, last week, the discussion was about bills going up and people getting worse off. Where people's experience isn't matched in tone by the government that serves them, then I think there's a political dividend.
Quick final word, Anne?
I would say that I think there is that danger, actually, as this grows in scale. Generally, after the great financial crisis, there was a sort of long tail, which we probably are living through now, where centrist governments are punished. And the difficulty then for Keir Starmer is, you may say he's still a fan of globalisation, but he's also saying it impacted people very negatively. So I think you can land in the mushy middle about what you are. What is your worldview now? Is it just, well, the world's got more difficult, difficult. So what we said to you last year was going to happen is now not going to happen. That may get you through this very difficult time, but it's unlikely to be a political strategy that will take him into the next election.
Anne, Sam, always a pleasure. Thanks so much. Make sure to subscribe to Politics at Sam and Anne's if you have not done so already. Quick look at the markets before we get into our next story, just to update you on where we are. We are down now just 4.5% on the FTSE 100. And as for continental European markets, down a little bit more than that, but also pared some of the losses. Germany was down 8%, now down only 7%. But nonetheless, a day of sharp selling. Now, the parents of a 14-year-old boy who carries a knife and put his mother in hospital have told Sky News that police repeatedly failed to take their concerns seriously. Thousands of families are desperate for protection from their own children, but the services that deal with youth violence are struggling to cope. Becky Johnson has more.
A teenage boy who became suddenly violent, his anger fuelled by online influencers. To viewers of the hit drama Adolescence, this may sound familiar. To this couple, it's their son.
Harry was wonderful.
He used to be really caring.
And then about 12 and a half, it all changed.
The trigger, they say, was when Harry was hit by a girl. He's now 14 and has become so violent he's been taken into care. We're using actors to protect their identities.
Harry became obsessed with being strong, and I think he developed a difficulty around certain female people because of the assault.
The whole alpha male type of behaviour.
He began attacking his mother, beating her so badly she ended up in hospital, and he's threatened to stab a teacher too.
My worst fear is that he's going to end up killing one of us. If not us, then somebody else. There's going to be somebody out there that's the wrong day, the wrong time, and he's going to end up killing them.
It's a shocking thought for any parent to have, but they're not alone. This organisation supports parents who've been victims of their own children's violence. 3,500 people contacted them last year, a 70% increase on the year before. Families desperate for help.
What we're hearing time and time again is that referrals are not being picked up because thresholds aren't being met, because perhaps the parent or caregiver isn't a risk to the child. So therefore, families are falling through gaps.
At this boxing gym, they take children referred by schools, social workers, even police.
Why should charities be picking up the pieces that somehow the system isn't dealing with?
It's so difficult because I think that the services that are currently tackling these issues are absolutely inundated. I think the biggest cause of the violent behaviour is mental health. We're seeing a massive correlation within that. Social media is having a huge impact, especially around that young person's identity.
By 14, Ethan had been arrested several times for getting into fights.
Someone could look at me, I'd be angry. Social media, yeah, that's definitely got a massive part. I mean, my main thing was I see people with amazing bodies and stuff because they're working out, and I felt like I couldn't reach that point. It made me self-conscious, which would add on to the anger because I was angry at myself, which then turned into hatred towards other people. Just time and effort. That's all we need, and the understanding that it's a war in our heads.
A government spokesperson told us it's unacceptable that young people haven't been getting the care and treatment they need. Families believe the system isn't set up to deal with violent children. Becky Johnson, Sky News.
Well, still to come here on The Breakfast Show, as the UK markets grapple with Trump's tariffs, we'll be speaking to the owner of a stationery business about the impact it's had on them. We'll be right back.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power. No freedom! Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film. But it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Welcome back. Well, global stock markets are plummeting once again as we speak. The FTSE 100 is down 5%. Of course, it also these tariffs have meant great uncertainty for small businesses in the UK, with many fearful of what it will do to their imports and exports. Here with me, the founder of her own bespoke stationery business, Martha Keith. Thanks very much for joining us, Martha.
Thank you for having me.
Founder of Martha Brooks Stationery. So do you export a lot of what you make?
Yeah, so at the moment, 15% of what we make goes to the US. So we're a business that manufactures here in the UK. We're really proud of that. We don't manufacture in China. We make all our products ourselves, and then we send them all the way around the world. And the US is actually a real growing market for us. And I think one of the things I haven't really seen people talk about, which I think is interesting and is a real concern of mine, and I think is a concern to a lot of the other small businesses I speak to. At the moment, we send our products to the US in 2 ways. Partly through exporting, so that's more B2B, B2B, and then partly through selling them direct to consumers. And one of the things that is really unclear in what Trump has announced, so at the moment, everything that goes to the US under $800 is exempt from tariffs, and that's called the de minimis threshold. And at the moment, he's saying he's going to remove that for China, and I think partly because he doesn't quite know how to operate that, because that will have to go through the postal system, and he'll have to start charging tariffs or fees on things that are coming in direct to consumers. So he's going to trial it with China. And the real worry I'm hearing from a lot of UK small businesses, and it's a real concern of mine, is whether he's going to remove that wider. Because for our products that go directly to customers, which is actually a really large percentage of our business, and on marketplaces such as Etsy, it's up to 40% of our business goes directly to the US, is whether that's going to affect in the future. I don't think it's going to affect right now, whether it's going to affect the stuff we send directly to customers as well as the stuff we export. And I think even if it doesn't, my real concern is it's going to impact on consumer confidence from the US of ordering products from the UK. Because I think at the moment, I don't think people know. And I think that certainly a lot of customers in the US who think, oh, I'm going to go on Etsy, I'm going to buy stuff from the UK, or I'm going to go direct to that lovely business I've seen on Instagram or I'm going to go and buy from their website. If they don't have the confidence to come and buy from the UK, I think that could have a real impact.
It's probably too early to say, but I mean, the first couple of days, no immediate impact you can point to. It's just this uncertainty.
It's really hard to tell. I think what we've seen with the EU is that the knock-on impact on Brexit was that it definitely affected people's confidence to come and order from the UK because they don't know if they're going to be charged custom charges. And I think the concern for B2C shipments is that consumer confidence side of things. But at the moment, there's been a lot of kind of trying to work out the impact it's going to have. But I think we've not seen it instantly, but it's absolutely, in terms of exporting, which we see as a major growth area of us, going to have a big impact on our ability to grow.
And I don't know what your main raw materials are, but are some of them imported, and are you fearful globally, if there's trade wars going on, that costs are going to rise?
Definitely. So I think at the moment, for small businesses in the UK, it's a really tough time. So we do import some of our papers, which actually come from European paper mills. And the cost of that has absolutely soared since COVID and Brexit. I mean, it's more than doubled. So our margins have shrunk. And at the same time, the hit on our business that's going to the EU has been huge. And so costs have squeezed everywhere, and of course with them rising employment costs and everything else. So the US was one area we thought, right, this is a brilliant growth area for us. So it's just probably come at the worst possible time. And I think for any small business that's looking to export internationally, it's so confusing now because there's so many different rules and regulations for different countries. It's just something that we could really do without.
Martha, really thank you so much for joining us to get that perspective from small business. We're going to have a quick look at the weather.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's looking mostly fine this week, likely turning more unsettled next weekend. Expect a few changes, however, as high pressure over the North Sea sinks south, changing the wind direction. Most places will be fine if chilly over the next few hours after a frosty start for many, but there'll be fog in places, while the Northern Isles looks rather grey. Any fog will soon lift, leaving almost unbroken sunshine, but the far north will stay quite cloudy. Inland areas will become warm in the sunshine and it'll turn a little warmer near many eastern coasts. It'll be less windy than yesterday.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with all the day's top stories.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Good morning, it's 9 o'clock. Markets around the world see huge slumps with the FTSE 100 down sharply as fears grow over the impact of President Trump's tariffs.
The government and the opposition aligned to criticise the tariffs, saying they're bad for the global economy.
Plus, worries over a new type of harassment faced by NHS staff being filmed against their will and the footage posted online.
It's Monday, the 7th of April. Your headlines. The FTSE 100 suffers its biggest fall since the pandemic, and some Asian markets suffered their worst day since the Asian financial crisis in 1997, all in reaction to President Trump's tariffs.
I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something.
After British car makers were hit by those tariffs, the Prime Minister relaxes the rules on the transition to zero-emission vehicles.
My worst fear is that he's going to end up killing one of us. If not us, then somebody else.
After the hit show Adolescence, we hear the real-life nightmare scenario for any parent dealing with an increasingly violent child.
You believe that Arturo is on this picture? You think he's this guy?
Yes.
The Venezuelan families who say their loved ones have been wrongly detained because of Donald Trump's immigration crackdown. Good morning to you. The FTSE 100 has fallen sharply in its first hour of trade following a trend we saw overnight in Asia, with global stock markets in freefall as fears grow over the impact of Donald Trump's tariffs. Let's have a quick look for you at where markets are as we speak. The FTSE 100 is down just shy of 5% actually as we speak, and the German DAX is down just over 6%. It follows sharp declines in Asia. The Hong Kong market closed down an extraordinary 13.4%, with Japan down 7.8%, Shanghai down 7.3%. Let's get out to our business presenter, Darren McCaffrey. He's on a trading floor in central London. What's the mood there, Darren?
A bit of a bloodbath is how some traders, particularly in Asia, are branding today. It is yet again a very, very tough day for stock markets across Asia and Europe, and here, of course, in London too. You have to remember, on Friday, it was the biggest fall in the FTSE 100 since the pandemic. We are looking at similar numbers today. At one stage in the last hour, Wilf, all companies in the FTSE 100 were down. Across the world, though, it is unsurprising that it is companies that trade a lot with the United States that are seeing the biggest falls, particularly global banks, those that manufacture cars or planes, for example, Airbus, Rolls-Royce, badly hit, and also those luxury goods retailers who sell a lot to the US. They're the ones that are being really, really hammered this morning. Let's bring in Callum Pickering. He's Chief Economist here at Peel Hunt. Callum, very good morning to you. Another difficult day for the markets.
It's a difficult day, and just remember, global markets are driven by global expectations for investment, for trade, and for production, and trade wars are bad for all three. Markets hate uncertainty, and they're a confidence game, and right now confidence is low. Selling begets selling, and to stop the downside risks, to stop the selling, what we need to see are some off-ramps potentially from the US.
Just in terms of the wider economy, a lot of people in this country will not have stocks and shares, though their pensions may well depend on it. But there are concerns, and we saw Goldman Sachs suggest that the likelihood of a US recession has gone up yet again today.
That's right. The recession risk in the US is serious. I think I put it on around 35%, but of course the downside risks are severe. In the UK, I don't think we should be worried yet about a recession. Less than 2% of the UK economy is directly exposed to the US. We have lots of cash on our balance sheets. Our debt levels are low, at least on the private side. And just remember, through COVID, through the Russian invasion of Ukraine, as interest rates went up, people were much too pessimistic about the UK. It's not that we did very well, but we did much less bad than expected. We have buffers against shocks, and I think those buffers will play out again.
And just in terms of where the markets are at, they did rise quite a lot in the lead up and after President Trump was elected. Is this a bit of a correction? And also, we do know that he will make some deals which might settle things.
We will probably get some deals that will signal to markets that there is an off-ramp, that these are potentially not permanent tariffs. But the way to think about the markets coming into this is they were much too expensive in the US, much too cheap in Europe, because in the US for 5 years you'd had all the good news. You'd had the good growth, you'd had the good risk-adjusted returns. Europe was struggling. This really takes the shine out of the US, and it challenges the assumption that the US is the place to be. So when the recovery comes, I'd expect a more evenly spread geographical risk on move where Europe and the UK start to do a little bit better.
OK, Callum, for the timing, thank you very much indeed. Actually, Wilf, what will be interesting later on today is President Trump is meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister in the White House. Now, he imposed a 17% tariff on Israel last week. There is a possibility, it's been talked about here and elsewhere, that actually he may reduce that. And if that happens, that will calm the markets a little, because it'll remind them that maybe this is a president that wants to make a deal, that is prepared to move on tariffs, that they aren't necessarily permanent for everyone. And that will be worth watching later on today.
It certainly will, as will US markets when they open, which, by the way, are currently pointing to a 4.6% decline for the S&P 500. So we're getting close to so-called bear market territory in the US, a 20% decline from its recent peak. For now, Darren, great stuff. Thanks so much. As the FTSE 100 is down 4.6% as we speak. Now, China has accused the US of protectionism and economic bullying because of those tariffs. Their response came hours after the US president said he was not willing to make any deal with China unless the trade deficit issue was solved.
The US hegemonic move in the name of reciprocity serves its selfish interests at the expense of other countries' legitimate interests and puts America first over international rules. This is a typical move of unilateralism, protectionism, and economic bullying.
Well, the Prime Minister has already made moves to mitigate the impact of Donald Trump's tariffs by relaxing the rules around electric vehicles. A little earlier, I asked the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, about those plans and whether or not a recession can be avoided.
So the imposition of global tariffs and the reciprocal tariffs that some countries have and retaliatory tariffs that some countries have decided to apply are bad news for the global economy because it's bad for global demand, it's bad for prices and it's bad for consumers. And so that is why we have to do everything that we can to protect the interests of the British people and British businesses.
So, Mari, the Prime Minister will be speaking later today.
Yes.
And I guess trying to focus on how they're relaxing a little bit around the edges this transition to electric vehicles as an attempt to help the car industry. I guess when you're in the face of another 5% decline for the FTSE 100, a 13% decline for the Hong Kong market, the questions he's going to get are going to be along the lines of, is this enough? Are you doing enough given the scale of the challenges that we're facing?
Exactly. And I think that will be also the kind of stuff that we'll be asking, journalists will be asking his spokesperson beforehand at the lobby briefing in Downing Street. I mean, this is the difficulty for the government, is actually so much is out of their hands in a globalised economy. And despite, you know, whatever briefings might have happened over the weekend, the Prime Minister's allies insist that he is still very much in favour of free and open trade, and that is the best way for the UK economy to grow and to thrive. And what they argue around these kind of globalisation lines that have been disseminated over the weekend is that there has been gains from globalisation, but the government believes that that's also been at the expense of certain communities. It's about finding the right balance and making sure that all decisions are made in the national interest, which is what we keep hearing this morning. Decisions will be made in the national interest. But as you pointed out, and as to an extent Richard Holden, the Conservatives, pointed out, today is the day that the national insurance hike for businesses comes in, and therefore you're getting businesses kind of clobbered from more than one direction this week with the tariffs and then also that tax hike. And as your guest just earlier on was saying, it's a changing environment in which they have to continually get used to new rules, new changes, and potentially find cash elsewhere to pay taxes coming from one direction or another. And so, you know, Heidi Alexander was speaking to you in that clip, and she said, we understand that we are asking a lot of business right now, but we believe it's the only way we can fund public services. The difficulty will be with these tariffs, with the impact on car manufacturing, and then also this hike in national insurance. Does that start to have a negative impact on growth? Does that start to have a negative impact on employment? That's the kind of stuff that the OBR has potentially been predicting. And that is a much, much bigger problem for the country and for the government.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost inconceivable that it wouldn't have an impact on growth. I guess the question will be the extent to which that impact is, and then who the electorate blame. And in one sense, this will give the government some cover to say, well, it's not our fault. We'll see if that argument is made, and how severe the pressure is at the moment. By the way, just a reminder, the FTSE 100 down nearly 5%. Mark Grace up. Thank you. Now, 2 people have been killed and 6 others were injured after an Israeli airstrike hit a tent in southern Gaza. The tent was being used as a base by journalists outside the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis. Local health officials say that more than 30 people were killed in separate Israeli strikes on Sunday. The son of an elderly British couple being held in a high-security prison in Afghanistan has told Sky News his parents have never heard one accusation or charge. Barbie and Peter Reynolds have lived in the country for the last 18 years. They were detained by the Taliban's Interior Ministry in February. Their son, Jonathan, says he's extremely worried for their welfare.
They are under a deep conviction from back in the sort of late 60s when they married in Afghanistan in 1970, that they were going to give their life for the future, a bright future for Afghanistan. So when the Taliban came in by force, the British government and the embassy there said, hey, you've got about a 20 or a 40-minute window, we can get you out. To which my parents responded, why would we leave these people in their darkest hour?
2 people have been arrested after a man was shot dead in County Durham. Emergency services were called to an address in Stanley on Saturday night following reports of a disturbance. The 60-year-old man was pronounced dead at the scene. Police say man and woman have been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. NHS staff are being harassed by members of the public, filming them with phones and threatening to post footage online. A survey by Unison found that 1 in 7 health workers have experienced unwanted and intrusive filming in just the last year. Sadia is here with more on this story. So, Sadia, what exactly are we talking about here?
So this is patients and sometimes their families who come to these medical appointments and film them without the consent of the workers who are involved. And this could be anything. So emergency departments where there might be an altercation or anything happening there and people start filming it. There's also a reference in this survey to drive-bys. So if there's been a road accident, some people get out and start filming that, and paramedics are working. And so the medics say this is them doing a really high-intensity job and they don't want to be filmed during that. We've also seen in this survey that some of the medics are having their license plates recorded, and this then turns into threats. So it's being put onto social media. Sometimes the footage is being live streamed. It is being used to threaten staff and used as a bargaining tool. This one is quite surprising. Used as a bargaining tool to try and get medicine or try and get their way. The NHS workers say it is happening everywhere, in hospitals, in online consultations, as well as inside patients' own homes. They say it's not just mobile phones that are being used, but webcams as well, and also secret sort of filming, hidden cameras. Many people do stop when they're asked not to film, but sometimes that asking of not to be filmed can lead to more aggression. The survey has been carried out by the workers' union Unison. It says incidents are leaving staff feeling intimidated and fearful, and that this is unwanted and intrusive. So when they asked NHS workers in a survey about if they've faced any form of intimidation from patients or families filming them in the past year, 14%, so that's 1 in 7, said yes, that they had. Unison is asking employers to do more in terms of stopping people filming and putting signs up so people know that they're not allowed to film without consent. So,
Christoph, thank you. Now, the family of a Venezuelan man deported from the US has told Sky News he was targeted by authorities because of his tattoos. Hundreds of Venezuelans have been accused of being gang members and sent to prison in El Salvador under Donald Trump's sweeping crackdown on immigration. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner has this report.
Until 5 weeks ago, Arturo Suarez was a professional singer performing in the US while seeking asylum from his native Venezuela. He followed the legal process to enter, but while recording a music video last month, he was arrested. It's believed he's one of over 200 men deported, not to their home country, but to this notorious El Salvador prison. It's part of President Trump's anti-immigration showpiece.
So you believe that Arturo is on this picture? You think he's this guy?
Yes.
That must be...
This is my bro.
That must be very sad to see.
Yeah.
Arturo's brother Nelson believes this is him, bound by his hands and feet, head shaved. The White House says Arturo is a gang member, but they've not provided any evidence to support this.
This is my brother. It's crazy, it's horrible.
Nelson says his brother's only crime is being Venezuelan and having tattoos.
Aproximadamente 33.
33 tattoos?
33 tattoos. Pero
he liked tattoos?
No represent ganga 30 agua.
It wasn't the gangs?
No.
A hummingbird tattoo in memory of his late mother, a piano and verses from the Bible. Nelson believes this is what landed his brother in prison.
Policía Nacional de Colombia.
He shows me letters from the authorities in Colombia, Chile and Venezuela, stating Arturo has no criminal record in any of the countries he's lived in. Nelson is in America also claiming asylum. He worries about being deported too, and for his brother's safety.
We don't know what conditions he is in, if he has been mistreated, if his rights are being violated.
The men deported on planes to El Salvador were seemingly denied due process. President Trump is defying the judiciary at every turn. Other families say their loved ones were targeted for their tattoos too. Herthe Reyes had a Real Madrid badge with rosary beads, the White House says a gang symbol. And this 31-year-old makeup artist had tattoos on his wrist reading Mum and Dad, both men now in the El Salvador mega prison. The Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, visited too.
Do not come to our country illegally.
Posing in front of inmates.
How did you feel seeing Kristi Noem doing a photo shoot in that prison, knowing that your brother is probably there?
I feel bad, horrible, because in those images we only see criminals. With my brother, I feel like it's more a political issue. They needed numbers. They said these are the numbers. And now let's throw them to the lions.
The Trump administration has now admitted it sent at least one man to the El Salvador prison by mistake, calling it an administrative error. Incredibly, the government also now says it lacks the power to order his return. I contacted the White House to ask about Arturo's case and the other men sent to this prison for ambiguous reasons and without any court hearing. They didn't respond. Nelson's questions about why his brother was taken from him and thrown in prison are still unanswered. Martha Kellner, Sky News.
Time for a look at the weather.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's looking mostly fine this week, likely turning more unsettled next weekend. Expect a few changes, however, as high pressure over the North Sea sinks south, changing the wind direction. Most places will be fine, if chilly, over the next few hours after a frosty start for many, but there'll be fog in places, while the Northern Isles look rather grey. Any fog will soon lift, leaving almost unbroken sunshine, but the far north will stay quite cloudy. Inland areas will become warm in the sunshine, and it'll turn a little warmer near many eastern coasts.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, the very latest on the markets. We'll get the view from Berlin next.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirmed that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides. now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Welcome back. The FTSE 100 down sharply, an hour and 20 minutes into trade, down about 5% as we speak. It was a starker picture in Germany. The initial open for the German DAX was down 11%. Those losses have halved. It's down 5.5% as we speak. The FTSE's down 4.5%. Let's get reaction. Joining me now from Berlin is Holger Schmieding. He's the chief economist at Berenberg Bank. Holger, great to see you again. Thanks for joining us. I mean, what is the mood in Germany, in Berlin, in Frankfurt at the moment, in light of this massive selling following the tariff announcement last week?
The mood is, of course, anxious. Germany is heavily export dependent, so this could, in theory, be a severe blow to the German and European economy. Having said that, the very fact that markets are so unsettled and the very fact that Trump has levied very high tariffs on those exporters from Asia that send consumer goods to the US, that makes it likely that in the US, consumers, investors, and probably voters will notice that this is the wrong course. So in Germany, Frankfurt and Brussels, there is hope that negotiations can start soon and that in the negotiations, the US side will yield a bit so that in the end, the tariffs will not be quite as bad as Trump has announced them now.
Let's explore a couple of scenarios, Holger. What if that doesn't happen? And let's assume the tariffs that are imposed at the moment remain for the whole course of 2025. What will that do to Germany and the EU's economy?
If these tariffs stay as they are, then we would probably have a mild recession in Germany later this year and very little growth in the Eurozone as a whole. But we would probably see even more severe damage in the US. And depending a bit on the retaliation which Europe would impose, we, of course, would also have interesting effects on prices. Some prices going up, that is on stuff from the US on which we levy countermeasures, but other prices, of course, going down in a weaker economy and in fewer goods being sent to the US, so more goods staying at home.
What about the sort of better scenario where everything kind of cools down and tariffs are either reduced or removed in the weeks and months ahead? Is there still a lasting damage to all of this and the extent to which foreign companies, i.e. non-US companies, can kind of rely on the trade that they do with America?
There will definitely be some lasting damage, but this damage will be mostly for the US, not for Europe. The US is now unreliable in terms of its economic policies. That means some companies may hesitate to invest in the US. Also, the US is disrupting its trade relations and now causing uncertainty for its relations with basically all of its trading partners, whereas for Europe, this is a problem, and for Germany, with one of Germany's major trading partners. About 10% of German exports go to the US. That's a lot, but 90% of German exports go to other places. So if much of this damage is done away in negotiations, then probably the longer-term impact on the German and European economy will be minor. The longer-term impact on the US will, however, be more severe.
Just talk us through the likely reaction politically in Germany. I know you're still forming the new government. We debate a lot here whether the UK should abandon its fiscal rules. Should they spend more? Should they tax more if necessary, or vice versa? I guess it's fair to say that in Germany, it looks like, if not already, its fiscal rules, the equivalent, have been abandoned, and huge government spending is now expected, or just a small increase. What's the scale of what's to come?
Well, it's in a way a fortunate coincidence that for very separate reasons, Germany has just relaxed its fiscal rules. There will be a lot of spending, but the spending on infrastructure and defense takes time. So the extra government spending will probably be felt only in the year 2026 and thereafter, going up year by year by year. As to any immediate reaction, it will likely be up to the central bank, the European Central Bank, which will probably cut rates on the 17th of April, now that the economic outlook has darkened.
And just finally, when we look at the scale of selling that we've seen, Holger, we mentioned that Hong Kong closed down over 13%, the worst day since the Asian financial crisis in 1997. The DAX, where you are, is down 6%. It follows nearly 10% declines last week across Europe. It's painting a picture of, financial meltdown. If you look at the scale of those moves today, is that overdone in your view?
Well, it is a significant correction. It is a lot of fear in markets. And whether this now goes on much further or whether there will be a sharp upward move, which is possible, depends pretty much on the news out of the US. Once it registers with the White House and with people in Congress, the Republicans in the US, that this is really bad and that this is worse for the US than it is for Europe and most other countries. Once that happens, once we talk about negotiations, there is quite a potential for a move up again, hoping that these negotiations will yield results. Later today, EU trade ministers will meet to discuss the potential European reaction. And unlike China, which has retaliated harshly immediately, Europe will probably retaliate only very modestly and wait for negotiations. So Europe will probably try to play it sort of nice, hoping that that raises the chances that in the end, a good part of the extra Trump tariffs can be negotiated away. And if so, the mood and the outlook for growth would, of course, improve again in Europe.
Holger, great stuff. Thanks so much for joining us. Much appreciated. As we leave, Holger, the FTSE down nearly 5%, the German DAX down just over 6%. So to come here on The Breakfast Show, we're going to talk about how British car makers may or may not cope with President Trump's tariffs. We're talking to a motoring expert next. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up, motoring journalist Quentin Wilson will join us on the impact of President Trump's tariffs on the car industry and give us a reaction to what the government's announced today as well. But first, a reminder of the top stories this morning. The FTSE 100 fell sharply on open this morning and is currently down 5%. Markets in Europe also being hit hard, especially in Germany. Germany was down briefly 10%. It's now down about 6%, and it follows a tumultuous night for Asian markets, of course, following the aftermath of Donald Trump's tariffs.
I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something.
So we'll relax the rules around the UK's transition to zero-emission vehicles today after car makers were hit by Donald Trump's tariffs. The UK faces a 10% duty on exports to the US, with all cars imported to the US facing a further 25% levy. Petrol and diesel car sales will end by 2030, but regulations will be changed to ease the transition. NHS staff are being harassed by members of the public, filming them with phones and threatening to post footage online. A survey by Unison found that 1 in 7 workers have experienced unwanted and intrusive filming in the last year. And with rubbish piled high in Birmingham, talks on a way forward will be held between the Unite Union and Birmingham City Council today. The council said picket lines blocking its depots are preventing waste vehicles from collecting rubbish, and some 17,000 tonnes are lining the streets currently. Well, let's get more on that final story and bring in Shaman Freeman-Powell. She's in Birmingham for us live this morning. Shaman, rather you than me, I bet it's not a pleasant smell.
It's not a pleasant smell, especially for residents. We're currently in Small Heath in Birmingham, and you can see that the rubbish is lining the length of this street. You've got bins that are overflowing, and it's also resulted in waste just being scattered all over the pavement too. Now, some residents are able to go to refuse centres to dump their waste, but those who aren't able to get slots or maybe not have vehicles in order to do so are instead doing this. I'm just going to show you what you can see at the end of this road. Residents frustrated with having to leave their rubbish outside their properties are turning to dump it in places like this. You can see old and rotten food, you can see nappy bags, and it's not clear whether or not these were left open when they were dumped or whether or not it's rats and foxes that have been able to make their way into this rubbish. That is definitely a concern of the residents that I've spoken to here this morning. We saw multiple people crossing the road to avoid this rubbish, with one person telling me that they often see rats running around this street as they're trying to pass during the day. It really is a cause of frustration, but of course it's the result of ongoing disputes between Birmingham City Council and Unite the Union. In simple terms, Birmingham City Council is bankrupt and it needs to save money, so it says it wants to scrap one of the safeguarding roles. Unite the Union says that this will mean around 170 workers being around £8,000 a year worse off. Now, the Birmingham City Council dispute this figure and says it has given alternative options like other job roles as well as voluntary redundancies as a result, arguing that no one needs to lose out on money. But at the minute, the only winners are pests, rats and rodents that are making their way through the rubbish, and even if cleared, could continue to be an issue for some months yet.
Shaman, great stuff as always. Thanks so much, Shaman Freeman-Powell, for us there in Birmingham. We'll see how those talks get on today and keep you updated throughout the day. The other big story, of course, is the global market reaction to the tariffs that not just are in place but continue and have been backed up with resolute language from the White House over the weekend. It's led to turmoil across markets globally. The Asian markets session was sharply low, with Hong Kong down 13%. Let's get an update on what's going on in the European trade. Darren McCaffrey's on a trading floor in London for us. Darren, what's the latest?
Yeah, very good morning to you, Wilf. The sell-off continues here in London and indeed across Europe after a very difficult night for Asian markets. At one stage this morning, the FTSE down more than 5%, and every single company on the FTSE 100 was in the red. And we're seeing, actually, in many ways, European markets plunge even further. It is shares in manufacturers in particular that's taking a hammering today. Airbus down quite significantly. Rolls-Royce at one stage down at 13%, clearly exporting to the United States. Also banks, those big global banks, the deal in global trade also been hammered today, and also luxury manufacturers who sell quite a lot to the US. And it is really, really hammering. As I say, the stock market, trillions have been wiped out in the last week globally, given this imposition of tariffs. And fundamentally, what's at play here, Wilf, is not just the imposition of those tariffs that clearly are going to slow global growth and have an impact on the world economy, not least of all on the United States. Goldman Sachs suggesting that the chances of a recession in the United States have gone up yet again today. But it's also fundamentally the uncertainty. What investors here in London and indeed elsewhere cannot work out is, are these tariffs permanent? i.e., are they going to be around for a long time and prove a really sustainable impact on the global economy with a real trade war, particularly with China? Or are they part of a negotiating tactic by Donald Trump to try and get a better deal for America, and that they could be temporary? And it is that uncertainty that is largely driving this stock sell-off, because we don't quite know what Donald Trump is going to do next. And by the way, it is not just the impact on the stock market. As should be said, the dollar is down yet again today, as is oil as well.
Darren, great stuff. Thanks so much. Darren McCaffrey there for us live in the city of London, with the FTSE 100 down 4.5% as we speak. Well, the Prime Minister unveiled plans earlier today to support car manufacturers and phasing out diesel and petrol cars by 2030. That much we already knew, but they've tweaked the terms in which those transitions will take place. Let's discuss all of this now and the impact being felt at the moment on the UK car sector with motoring journalist Quentin Wilson. Thanks so much for joining us, Quentin. Before we get to what the Prime Minister is announcing today, these tariffs from the US, how big a blow are they on the UK auto sector?
Well, very serious in the sense that companies like JLR, a large part of their income comes from their sales in the US. And the Prime Minister is absolutely right to support the motor industry. JLR have stopped imports into America. They've got probably 2 months of supply of cars out there. And the waiting game is what we'll be playing right now. As Dan said earlier, do we know whether this is a strategy, or do we think Trump is going to be completely unmovable on this? And looking at the demonstrations yesterday in America, looking at what Elon Musk said, that Europe and the UK should be tariff-free between them and America, and there's some Republican pushback in the Senate, and Trump's beloved Fox News has even turned against him. We could see a change, but in the short to medium term, the government is absolutely right to protect our auto industry.
Do you see as what's been announced today as significant protection for the auto industry?
It's not enough, but it's the best, I guess, that the government can do with limited resources available. They've softened the ZEV mandate for electric cars and made hybrids to go on sale beyond 2030, which I'm not sure is the right decision, because they're not as environmentally friendly or as economical as consumers have been led to believe. But we can't have our auto industry being fined for not making targets. So he's reduced the fines from 15,000 to 12,000 and said that no UK car company should be fined, which is great. But we need to understand that if we dilute these electric car targets too much, then China will have this huge advantage. They're 10 years ahead of us. So what the government has said, and the Prime Minister in particular, that he recognises that the UK is one of the most important markets in Europe for EVs, and we've overtaken France and Germany. So that's something we really do need to push hard and recognise that all that distressed capital in America could come here. So he needs to be really cognizant of the fact that there are opportunities to stimulate our UK auto industry while Trump allows America to burn.
Do you think it is realistic that no more petrol and diesel cars will be sold in the UK from 2030 or not?
Yes, it is realistic. Look, electric cars have really done very well. We had one of the best marches ever, up 40%. Used electric cars are going gangbusters. They're up 54% this year. And we've got to the stage where electric cars, used electric cars particularly, are cheaper than combustion cars, and they save you £1,000 a year in fuel, and there's savings from maintenance as well because they require less servicing. We've got 75,000 chargers. We need much more. But people also need to realize they can carry on driving combustion cars and owning them for decades and decades after 2030. And this is a great misnomer that people believe that all sales of combustion cars will be banned. Of course they won't. You can buy your combustion car right up until midnight on 2030 and keep it for another 40 years. So it's very important with the global improvement in electric car penetration, particularly in China, that our economy here reflects that, and our auto industry starts to be really innovative and creative when it comes to electric cars, and start building some of the best in the world.
Do you think that is realistic by 2030, or realistically with the advantages that either Tesla in the US have or BYD in China have, the vast majority of the EVs British people will be buying will be coming from overseas?
I think a large portion of them will. But we have good electric cars like the Mini, Range Rover coming up with an electric Range Rover. So no, we're not going to be a massive global force in EVs, but we can attract green capital into the UK, and we can start to build better. And those manufacturers who have kind of sat on their hands with electric cars, they will kind of rue the day, and they really do need to start saying, okay, this is a great market for electric cars. We can export all over the world. We need to start making cars that consumers want.
Quentin, thanks so much for joining us. Really interesting. So to come here on The Breakfast Show, the rise in youth violence. We'll hear from parents raising the alarm over their own children and saying the police aren't taking them seriously.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent.
It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century.
I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirmed that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat. If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing. People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight.
We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record.
Sky News, the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I just took a shower above the clouds. You know why? Because this is the Emirates A380.
What about the parents of a 14-year-old boy who carries a knife and put his mother in hospital have told Sky News that police repeatedly failed to take their concerns seriously. Our social affairs correspondent Becky Johnson's been looking into this story and joins us now. Becky, set it up for us.
Well, the hit drama Adolescence has got us all talking about the issue of youth violence, hasn't it? The Netflix show that depicts a 14-year-old boy accused of murdering a girl from his school. And it's brought to life for so many people the real concerns around youth violence, the impact of social media and online content, mental health. Even the Prime Minister was talking about it last week. But for many families, these have been very real issues for quite some time. And in communities across the country, there are families grappling with how to deal with their own teenagers. I've met one of those families, and this is my report. A teenage boy who became suddenly violent, his anger fuelled by online influencers. To viewers of the hit drama Adolescence, this may sound familiar. To this couple, it's their son.
Harry was wonderful.
He used to be really caring.
And then about 12 and a half, it all changed.
The trigger, they say, was when Harry was hit by a girl. He's now 14 and has become so violent he's been taken into care. We're using actors to protect their identities.
Harry became obsessed with being strong, and I think he developed a difficulty around certain female people because of the assault.
The whole alpha male type of behaviour.
He began attacking his mother, beating her so badly she ended up in hospital, and he's threatened to stab a teacher too.
My worst fear is that he's going to end up killing one of us. If not us, then somebody else. There's going to be somebody out there that's the wrong day, the wrong time, and he's going to end up killing them.
It's a shocking thought for any parent to have, but they're not alone. This organisation supports parents who've been victims of their own children's violence. 3,500 people contacted them last year, a 70% increase on the year before. Families desperate for help.
What we're hearing time and time again is that referrals are not being picked up because thresholds aren't being met, because perhaps the parent or caregiver isn't a risk to the child. So therefore, families are falling through gaps.
At this boxing gym, they take children referred by schools, social workers, even police. Why should charities be picking up the pieces that somehow the system isn't dealing with?
It's so difficult because I think that the services that are currently tackling these issues are absolutely inundated. I think the biggest cause of the violent behaviour is mental health. We're seeing a massive correlation within that. Social media is having a huge impact, especially around that young person's identity.
By 14, Ethan had been arrested several times for getting into fights.
Someone could look at me, I'd be angry. Social media, yeah, that's definitely got a massive, massive part. I mean, my main thing was I see people with amazing bodies and stuff because they're working out, and I felt like I couldn't reach that point. It made me self-conscious, which would add on to the anger because I was angry at myself, which then turned into hatred towards other people. Just time and effort. That's all we need, and the understanding that it's a war in our heads.
A government spokesperson told us it's unacceptable that young people haven't been getting the care and treatment they need. Families believe the system isn't set up to deal with violent children.
Well, Becky, I mean, extraordinary and harrowing report, really, kind of the reality version of the adolescence drama. What are the sort of changes that people are saying are needed to try and address this issue?
Well, there isn't really a service that deals with this. If you think about the kind of options that parents might have, they're trying to seek mental health support. Well, we know there are huge delays for any children with mental health issues waiting to be seen. Parents can try calling social services, but then children's services in this country are set up, well, child protection it's called, they're set up to protect children. So when the child is the risk, as opposed to being at risk themselves, that there's actually parents are often told, well, this doesn't meet the threshold, so social services don't intervene. You know, the police can get called, but of course, you know, charging a 14-year-old with a serious offence, that's going to have a big impact on their life chances. So police are kind of understandably reticent to do that. So it really leaves parents with very little scope for knowing who to turn to. There's a lack of funding in this area. You know, the Prime Minister is saying, well, everyone in schools should be watching Adolescence, the drama. That's all very well, but actually, I think a lot of communities are very well aware of the issues raised in adolescence. Actually, what people don't have are services to deal with them. And many people I've been speaking to say that there really needs to be a change in policy on how to deal with this.
What about the violence on social media and online? I mean, how is that still so readily available?
Well, you know, we saw in adolescence the parents there in that drama talking about not really know that, you know, they thought their son was safe in his bedroom, but in fact he was accessing all sorts of content that they weren't aware of. And that was the case for the parents that I spoke to. Their son, they later found, had been accessing really alpha male misogynistic content online that had really warped his view of women and girls, and that had happened without them knowing. So, of course, many charities warning parents to really be much more aware of what your children are watching, because algorithms will keep pushing this material. Controversial material gets pushed to more people because the more views something has, the more it gets sent to people. If a 14-year-old boy is watching something, the algorithm knows that's content that's attractive to 14-year-old boys. It'll push it to more 14-year-old boys, and that's how this perpetuates in a really dangerous way.
Becky, thanks so much. Let's have a look at the weather now.
The perfect climate, wherever the destination. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's looking mostly fine this week, likely turning more unsettled next weekend. Expect a few changes, however, as high pressure over the North Sea sinks south, changing the wind direction. Most places will be fine, if chilly, over the next few hours. After a frosty start for many, but there'll be fog in places, while the Northern Isles look rather grey. Any fog will soon lift, leaving almost unbroken sunshine, but the far north will stay quite cloudy. Inland areas will become warm in the sunshine, and it'll turn a little warmer near many eastern coasts. It'll be less windy than yesterday. The weather has finished without a bumper there. Anyway, there we go. Let's quickly check in on the markets as we start to wrap up the show. And they're sharply lower as they have been all morning. The European markets, for you quickly, down 4.4% for the FTSE 100. And continental Europe down more, as you can see. The German DAX down 6.5%, France down 6%, and Spain and Italy down similar amounts, 6%. And it follows very sharp declines across Asia, including a 13% decline in Hong Kong. Mari, this is going to be the topic, certainly of the day, probably of the week, for the Prime Minister. And he is giving a speech this afternoon.
Yes, we're going to be hearing from him early afternoon on a visit. And it'll be interesting to see, because this is really going to be the first official response from the Prime Minister since those tariffs were put into place. We've heard from him, whether it's in op-eds or through spokespeople, but he hasn't done a kind of big set-piece event since Wednesday when those tariffs were announced. So it is his opportunity to try and show that he is back on the front foot rather than reacting on the back foot, and trying to show actually his vision for the UK despite these roadblocks. The difficulty is, as you were outlining earlier, the questions he's going to be bombarded with around those figures you were just outlining and the market reaction.
So he'll probably be quizzed by journalists at this press conference. Will there be PMQs on Wednesday?
No, so the Parliament is going to be going into recess as of tomorrow, so the House rises, and then there won't be PMQs for a couple of weeks. It's the Easter holidays, essentially.
But no doubt he will have to stay plugged in. I mean, we've joked in the past about whether he got a much-deserved holiday briefly at one point, but this is going to keep him fully engaged.
Well, yeah, I mean, so I think we understand this week he is still going to be working, and then we expect him to be going on holiday the week after. We'll see if that actually happens, because a lot of the time politicians' holidays end up getting derailed or cancelled because of world events. And just as a kind of fun side note, I think within a few days we can probably expect the Lib Dems to try and call for the recall of Parliament. They tend to do that almost every single recess, to no avail.
Let's just leave you with a picture of what markets are doing. The German DAX is down 6%, the FTSE 100 down 5%. Essentially, continental Europe is down 5.5% to 6%, depending where you look at it. And a reminder that Hong Kong closed down 13%, making it the worst single trading day since the Asian financial crisis in 1997, giving you a snapshot of the scale of how markets are interpreting the current environment. US futures expected to open lower as well. Jane Secker is up next. Don't go anywhere.